Every single person in the Hidden Leaf Village believes they know exactly who Naruto Uzumaki is. The loud one. The prankster. The kid who fails the same exam twice and still finds a way to grin about it. The dead last of his class, forever 3 steps behind Sasuke Uchiha. Forever the punchline before he's ever given the chance to be the hero. Now, what if every single one of them is wrong? What if the boy they've written off has been hiding something so dangerous, so precise, that even the strongest shinobi in the village would stop laughing the second they saw it? And what if the moment that truth finally claws its way to the surface isn't some grand tournament, isn't some public spectacle, but one quiet, blood-soaked night on a forgotten border road that nobody was ever supposed to report? That night is where our story begins. Stick with me to the end of this one, because by the time we're done, you're going to understand exactly why the strongest man in the village couldn't sleep afterward. Let's get into it. It started, as these things always do, with a mission that looked too easy to matter. Team 7 stood in a loose half-circle in front of the Hokage's desk, and if you'd walked into that room without context, you would have assumed nothing important was happening at all. Just a village elder handing off paperwork to a jonin and 3 kids who barely came up to his shoulder. A simple escort, the Third Hokage said, sliding a scroll across the desk toward Kakashi Hatake. A merchant caravan traveling to the border town of Kuragawa. 2 days there, 1 day of waiting while they finished trade negotiations, 2 days back. C rank, low risk. Another boring one, Naruto groaned, arms crossed behind his head. Can't we get something with actual ninja in it this time? Missing mean, bandits, anything? Would you like me to write ambush requested into the mission brief? Kakashi asked without looking up from the scroll, and Sakura let out a short laugh she immediately tried to smother. I'm just saying, Naruto muttered, we've been genin for months and all we do is walk old guys across roads. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the world refuses to see what you're actually capable of, hang on to that feeling, because Naruto's about to learn there's a difference between wanting a real fight and being ready for one. And the universe, as always, has perfect comedic timing. Try not to jinx us, Sasuke said flatly, already turning for the door. They set out an hour later. Sakura walked at the flank, kunai pouch checked twice out of habit, her long sleeves cinched at the wrist the way she always wore them on missions, practical, unshowy, built for movement rather than display. Sasuke took point beside Kakashi, quiet in the way that made people assume he wasn't paying attention when in reality he never stopped. And Naruto trailed a half-step behind, hands laced behind his head, whistling something tuneless, looking, to any outside observer, like precisely nothing at all. Which is exactly the problem, isn't it? Because looking like nothing and being nothing are 2 very different things. And this village was about to learn that the hard way. The road to Kuragawa cut through a stretch of forest that thinned into rocky hill country about a day and a half out from Konoha. Sparse pine, cold wind. The kind of terrain where sound travels further than it should and shadows sit a little too still. Kakashi had walked this route twice before on other missions. Nothing here had ever been worth a second look. That should have been the first warning sign. Nothing is ever nothing for long in this line of work. They made camp the first night without incident. Sakura took first watch, sitting cross-legged near the fire with a canteen of warm tea cradled in both hands. Steam curling up past her face into the cold air. Sasuke sat a short distance away, sharpening a kunai he didn't need to sharpen. And Naruto was staring up at the tree line with an expression none of them noticed, because none of them were looking. If they had been, they might have seen something strange. His eyes weren't wandering the way a bored genin's eyes wander. They were tracking. Counting. The way a person counts exits in a room without meaning to. He caught himself doing it, and forced a yawn instead, flopping back against his pack. Old habits. Ones he didn't fully understand himself yet, ones that had been quietly sharpening themselves in the back of his mind for years without an instructor, without a name, without anyone to tell him that what he was doing had a word for it. Vigilance. The second day passed the same as the first. Trade caravan met on schedule, negotiations began at Kuragawa exactly as planned. And Team 7 settled into the mind-numbing boredom of a guard rotation with nothing to guard against. It was on the return trip, the 3rd day, roughly 6 hours out from the village, that everything changed. If you've ever had that prickling feeling on the back of your neck, the one that makes you turn around for no reason you can name, That's the feeling Kakashi got about 4 hours into the return leg. He didn't say anything. He simply altered their pace by half a step, drifted a fraction closer to Sasuke, and let his visible eye slide sideways toward the tree line without turning his head. Sakura noticed the shift in him immediately. 3 months on this team had taught her to read Kakashi's silences the way other people read words, and her hand drifted to the strap of her weapon's pouch. Naruto noticed too. But Naruto did something none of them expected. He slowed his walk by exactly 2 steps, letting himself fall to the rear of the formation, and his eyes, still lazy looking on the surface, began doing that counting thing again. Trees. Gaps. Elevation changes. The wind direction. The place where the road narrowed between 2 outcroppings of rock 200 meters ahead. The kind of terrain that any half-decent tactician would recognize as a textbook choke point for an ambush. He didn't say anything either. Not yet. Because some instinct buried deep beneath 12 years of being ignored, underestimated, and left to figure things out alone told him that panicking early gets people killed just as fast as panicking late. They were 40 meters from the choke point when the first kunai came out of the tree line. Kakashi moved on reflex, sweeping Sakura and Sasuke back and down with one arm while his other hand flashed through a block, the kunai deflecting off steel with a sharp metallic crack that echoed off the rocks. Ambush. Defensive positions, now. 3 shapes dropped from the canopy, missing Nin, headbands scratched through, chakra signatures heavy and aggressive in a way that told Kakashi immediately this wasn't a random bandit crew. These were trained. Coordinated. And there were more than 3, because the moment he engaged the first pair, 2 additional signatures peeled off from the flanks, moving to encircle rather than confront. This is where a normal C-rank mission stops being a C-rank mission. This is where kids die if the adult in charge makes even one mistake. Kakashi engaged the 2 front attackers directly, forcing them back with a burst of taijutsu precise enough to buy his students 3 seconds. 3 seconds that should have been enough for Sasuke and Sakura to fall back to a defensible position exactly as they drilled 100 times in training. Except the flanking pair had already cut off that route. Sasuke, left. Sakura, get behind the rocks. Kakashi's voice cracked through the chaos, but even as he shouted it, part of his attention split away from the fight in front of him, because 5 enemies against 1 jonin and 2 genin was not a ratio that math was going to be kind to, and somewhere in the back of his mind he was already calculating how badly this was about to go. Sasuke turned to meet the attacker on his left, a wiry man with a long blade, and held his ground for exactly 2 exchanges before a second attacker dropped from above, forcing him into a defense he couldn't maintain against both at once. A blade grazed his shoulder. He staggered. Sakura screamed his name and turned to help, which was exactly the mistake the enemy closing in on her position had been waiting for. And this is the moment. This is the exact second where everything the village thought it knew about Naruto Uzumaki stopped being true. Because while Kakashi was fighting for his life against 2 opponents, while Sasuke was bleeding and off balance, while Sakura was 1 heartbeat from making a fatal error out of loyalty to her teammate, Naruto wasn't panicking. He wasn't even where anyone expected him to be. In the 3 seconds of chaos after the first kunai flew, Naruto had done something none of his teammates registered in the moment, because they were all too busy fighting to notice. He had moved, not toward the fight. Around it. 3 quick, silent steps that put him behind the rock outcropping to the choke point's northern edge. The exact terrain feature he'd clocked and filed away in his mind 200 meters back down the road. His hands were already moving through a sequence of seals. Fast. Clean. Nothing like the clumsy, over-telegraphed hand signs his instructors had spent months correcting in him during academy sparring. This was different, tighter, economical in a way that shouldn't have belonged to a genin barely out of his teens. Everyone down! His voice cracked across the clearing with a command edge none of them had ever heard from him before. Not loud in the way Naruto was usually loud, but sharp, certain. The kind of voice that makes your body obey before your brain finishes processing the words. Kakashi dropped. Sasuke, despite the blood running down his arm, dropped. Sakura, thank every bit of instinct she had, dropped a half-second later. The explosive tags Naruto had planted into the loose rock of the outcropping 3 seconds earlier detonated in a controlled arc. Not a wild spray of destruction, but a precisely angled blast that tore through the flanking position where the fifth attacker had been circling to pin Sakura from behind. The man was thrown clear, weapon skittering across the dirt, one arm clearly broken on impact. For a full second, nobody moved. The forest rang with silence in the aftermath, smoke curling up from the shattered rock. And then Naruto, still crouched low, kunai already in hand, eyes scanning the tree line with a focus that looked nothing like the boy who'd been complaining about boring missions 2 days earlier, spoke again, and this time his voice carried something that made even Kakashi's remaining opponent hesitate. Kakashi-sensei, they're pulling back to regroup on your flank in 4 seconds. Sasuke, favor your right side, your left arm's compromised. Cover Sakura's blind spot instead of trying to fight through the pain. Sakura, I need 3 kunai with wire, now, I'm setting a second perimeter. Silence again. Because none of them, not one single person in that clearing, friend or enemy, had ever heard Naruto Uzumaki give an order in his life. Let's pause here for a second, because I want you to really sit with what just happened. This isn't a boy getting lucky. This isn't adrenaline making someone swing wildly and connect. What Naruto just did, reading terrain before the fight started, identifying the choke point, predicting the ambush pattern, calculating a blast radius precise enough to disable an enemy without catching his own teammates in the damage, and then calmly redirecting 3 other fighters mid-combat based on real-time tactical assessment. That is not genin-level thinking. That's not even average jonin-level thinking. That's the kind of battlefield awareness people spend a career trying to develop. And somehow, this loud, failing, overlooked 12-year-old has been sitting on it the entire time, waiting, maybe without even realizing he was waiting, for a moment desperate enough to force it out of him. If you're new to this channel and you love watching hidden potential finally crack the surface, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because this is only the beginning of what Naruto's been hiding. Now back to the fight, because it is far from over. Sakura, despite her shock, moved. Years of drilling under Kakashi meant her body could follow an order even while her mind was still catching up, and she pressed the wire-wrapped kunai into Naruto's outstretched hand without a word. What are you? Sasuke started, but Naruto was already moving, weaving a perimeter of wire between the rocks with the same disturbing economy of motion he'd shown with the seals, low to the ground, never breaking cover, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry to his team, and no further. Trip line. If they come back through the gap, we'll know before they're close enough to use it. Kakashi, meanwhile, had used the brief lull to finish off his second opponent with a decisive strike, breathing hard. One eye, his visible one, fixed on his youngest student with an expression that was difficult to read even for someone who'd known him for years. Shock. Calculation. Something that looked almost like recognition, as if a puzzle piece he hadn't known was missing had just clicked audibly into place. The 2 remaining attackers, the ones who'd fled after the explosion, didn't come back through the gap. They came from above. Naruto's head snapped up half a second before the first shadow fell, and this time there was no time for seals, no time for elaborate tactics. This was raw reaction, the kind of thing that either you have or you don't. And as the attacker's blade came down towards Sakura's exposed back, Naruto crossed the distance between them faster than anyone in that clearing thought a genin could move, catching the blow on a crossed pair of kunai with a force that sent a shockwave of pain up both his arms. He didn't flinch. Sakura, now! She spun, driving a kunai up under the attacker's guard exactly where Naruto's block had opened him, and the man staggered back with a cry, blood blooming across his side. Sasuke, favoring his good arm exactly as instructed, took the final opponent down a heartbeat later with a controlled fire-style technique that scorched the man's cloak and sent him fleeing into the tree line, rather than risk a second exchange. And then, as quickly as it had started, it was over. The clearing went quiet except for ragged breathing and the crackle of smoldering rock. Kakashi lowered his guard slowly, scanning the tree line for a long moment before he was satisfied the threat had genuinely retreated, not simply repositioned. Sasuke sat down hard against a boulder, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder, staring at Naruto with an expression that had absolutely nothing to do with his usual rivalry-tinged annoyance. It looked, if anything, like the beginning of respect, the kind that comes when you realize someone you'd already sized up and dismissed has an entire dimension to them you never bothered to look for. Sakura's hands were shaking as she reached for her medical kit, adrenaline finally catching up to her, but even as she moved to treat Sasuke's arm, her eyes kept darting toward Naruto, who had crouched by the unconscious attacker with the broken arm, checking the man's pulse with a clinical detachment that felt almost frightening in someone his age. "He's alive," Naruto said simply. "We should bind him. Konoha interrogation will want him if he wakes up before we're back." Nobody responded right away. Because how do you respond to that? How do you look at the boy who set off firecrackers in class 3 weeks ago and reconcile him with the person who just planned, executed, and cleaned up an ambush kill zone with the efficiency of a seasoned operative? Naruto. Kakashi's voice, when he finally found it, was quieter than usual. "Where did you learn to do that? And here's the part that should chill you, if you're paying attention." Naruto looked up at him, and for just a fraction of a second, before the familiar, easy grin slid back into place like a mask clicking shut, something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation. Caution. The look of someone deciding, in real time, how much of the truth was safe to give. "Guess I'm just a genius nobody noticed," he said, grinning, rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture so perfectly, deliberately Naruto that it almost covered the moment that came before it. Almost. Kakashi didn't push. Not there, not in the open, not with an unconscious enemy at their feet and 2 students who needed to get back to the village for treatment. But he filed the moment away with the same precision Naruto had used to plant those explosive tags. And if you think for 1 second that Kakashi Hatake was going to let this go, you clearly don't know Kakashi Hatake. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, was that they hadn't been alone in that forest at all. Roughly 60 meters up and to the west, perched motionless in the crook of a pine tree with a chakra signature suppressed so completely it may as well not have existed, an Anbu operative, in a hawk mask had watched the entire engagement unfold from start to finish without moving a single muscle. The assignment had been simple, almost insultingly so: shadow a C-rank escort mission at a discreet distance, standard practice for routes that had shown any irregular activity in recent months, intervene only if the situation escalated beyond genin capability. Routine. Boring. The kind of assignment senior operatives handed to someone still proving themselves in the division. The hawk-masked figure had not intervened. Not because intervention wasn't warranted by the book. 5 armed missing nin against the jonin and 3 genin absolutely qualified as escalation. But because within the first 10 seconds of the ambush, it had become abundantly clear that intervention wasn't necessary. And the reason it wasn't necessary was sitting right there in plain view, wearing an orange and black jacket, cracking jokes about being a genius nobody noticed. The operative's masked head tilted slightly, tracking Naruto's movement through the fight with an intensity that had nothing to do with routine surveillance anymore. That boy planted a directional explosive tag under combat pressure with zero hesitation and a blast radius clean enough to avoid his own teammate by less than a meter. That boy read a choke point from 200 meters out. That boy gave field commands to a jonin-led team and every single person followed them without question. That boy is 12 years old. The operative remained in position long after Team 7 had finished securing their unconscious prisoner, and resumed their march back toward the village, watching the retreating figures until they disappeared around the bend in the road. Only then did the hawk mask turn skyward, and a single hand rose in a practice seal. Somewhere in the village, a message was already forming, one that would not go through the usual mission report channels, one that would land on exactly one desk, and one desk only. Let's take a beat here, because I think it's worth asking the question directly: what would you do, if you were the Third Hokage, and a report like that landed on your desk about a boy the entire village had spent 12 years underestimating? You're about to find out. Stick around, because this is where the story really begins. Night had fully settled over Konoha by the time Team 7 filed into the mission report office, exhaustion written plainly across all 4 of them. Sasuke's arm had been properly treated by a field medic at the village gate. Sakura, despite the tremor that still occasionally ran through her hands, had insisted on giving a clear, professional account of the engagement, and Naruto had gone right back to being loud, complaining about being hungry, asking if they could grab a bowl of ramen before heading home, laughing off Sasuke's pointed silence as nothing more than typical rivalry. If you didn't know better, if you hadn't watched what happened out on that road, you would never have guessed anything unusual took place at all. Kakashi filed the official report exactly as procedure required: successful escort, ambush encountered and repelled, 1 enemy captured for interrogation, minor injuries sustained, mission classified as a success. Standard language. Standard formatting. Nothing in the official document hinted at anything beyond a slightly more eventful than usual C rank. But Kakashi did something else, too, something that wouldn't show up on any official form. Before he dismissed his team for the night, he lingered at the mission desk a moment longer than necessary, and in a low voice meant for the clerk's ears alone, he requested, quietly, deliberately, that a supplemental note be forwarded directly to the Hokage's personal attention. Nothing dramatic. Just 4 words, handwritten at the bottom of an otherwise unremarkable form. We need to talk. Naruto. The Hokage's tower stood mostly dark by the time the reports began arriving on Hiruzen Sarutobi's desk, but the old man was still awake, still working, a habit that had never quite left him no matter how many decades passed since his own days in the field. The first report to arrive was Kakashi's official mission summary: thorough, professional, exactly what he expected from his most reliable jonin. The second was the supplemental note. 4 words. He read it twice, frowning slightly, setting it aside to follow up on in the morning. It was the third report, delivered not through normal channels but by a masked figure who appeared and vanished from his window in the space of a single breath, that made Hiruzen Sarutobi go very, very still. He unrolled the scrolls slowly. It was longer than Kakashi's official report by a significant margin, written in the clipped, precise hand of a trained ANBU field operative, and it did not describe a successful C-rank escort mission. It described, in exacting tactical detail, a 12-year-old boy who had identified an ambush before it happened, planted an explosive seal capable of disabling a trained enemy without endangering a single ally, issued real-time combat commands to a jonin-led squad under pressure, and closed out the engagement with the calm, clinical efficiency of someone who had trained for exactly this moment for years, despite there being no record, anywhere in the village's training archives, of that boy ever receiving instruction beyond the standard academy curriculum. Hiruzen read it once. Then he read it again, slower this time, his pipe forgotten and cold in the ashtray beside him, his old eyes moving back over specific lines as if rereading them might reveal they'd been some kind of mistake. They hadn't been a mistake. Every word was precise. Every detail, cross-referenced against Kakashi's own account, matched exactly. He set the scroll down on the desk and sat back in his chair, the weight of 12 years of careful, deliberate not noticing pressing down on him all at once. 12 years of watching a boy fail exams he shouldn't have failed, act out in ways that always seemed one shade too deliberate to be pure mischief, disappear for hours at a time with explanations that never quite added up when you looked closely enough, and he had let himself believe, because it was easier, because there was so much else demanding his attention, that it was simply a lonely child seeking notice however he could get it. What if it had never been that at all? What if, this entire time, right under the eyes of the strongest shinobi in the village, Naruto Uzumaki had been hiding something the likes of which Konoha hadn't seen from a child in a generation, and doing it so well that not one single person had thought to look twice? Hiruzen Sarutobi rose from his desk and walked to the window, looking out over the sleeping village, over the rooftops and the lanterns still glowing faintly in a few late windows, toward the small, unremarkable apartment on the edge of the district where he knew, without needing to check, a certain boy was almost certainly wide awake, staring at his ceiling, wondering if today was the day someone finally saw him for what he really was. The old man's hand tightened slowly around the edge of the windowsill. How long, he murmured to the empty room, have you been hiding this from all of us? Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the first cold edge of a decision that would change everything, not just for one boy, but for the entire structure of a village that thought it already knew exactly where its future Hokage candidates would come from. Because somewhere in the dark, an idea was already taking root in Hiruzen Sarutobi's mind. A dangerous one. A quiet one. The kind of idea that starts with 4 simple words scrawled at the bottom of a mission report, and ends with a mask, a rank, and a title no one in Konoha's history has ever earned this young. If you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't have the full picture yet. Because tomorrow morning, Naruto Uzumaki is going to be summoned to the Hokage's office for a meeting that officially never happened, and by the time he walks out of that room, the boy the village dismissed for 12 straight years is going to be handed a choice that will change absolutely everything. Naruto woke up that morning the same way he woke up most mornings. Late, tangled in a blanket that had lost the fight against the floor sometime around 3 in the morning, blinking blearily at a ceiling he'd stared at 1,000 times before. Except this morning was different, and he knew it the second his eyes opened. He'd barely slept. Not because of nightmares, not because of the ambush replaying behind his eyelids the way you might expect from a 12-year-old who'd just fought for his life. He'd stopped having those particular nightmares years ago, for reasons that would make anyone who knew the full truth deeply uncomfortable. No, he hadn't slept because some instinct buried deep in his gut, the same instinct that had counted exits in that forest without being told to, was telling him that something had shifted, that somewhere out there, someone had finally noticed. He sat up, ran a hand through hair that stubbornly refused to lie flat no matter what he did to it, and reached for the orange jacket draped over his desk chair. That was when the knock came. Not the kind of knock a friend gives, casual and quick. This was measured. Precise. 3 even raps, spaced exactly the same distance apart. The kind of knock that belonged to someone who did everything on purpose. Naruto crossed the small apartment in 4 steps and opened the door to find a Chunin messenger standing in the hallway, scroll in hand, expression carefully neutral in the particular way that Konoha shinobi were trained to wear when they didn't know, or weren't allowed to know, what was inside the message they were carrying. Naruto Uzumaki? That's me. You're to report to the Hokage's office. Immediately. This meeting is not to be logged through standard channels. The messenger held out the scroll, and Naruto took it, noting, because by now noticing things had become as natural to him as breathing, that the seal on it wasn't the usual Hokage Tower stamp. It was a different one. Smaller. Older. The kind of seal that didn't show up on documents meant for public record. Not to be logged, Naruto repeated slowly. Those are the instructions I was given, the messenger said, and then, without further explanation, turned and walked away down the hall, leaving Naruto standing in his doorway holding a scroll that felt, somehow, heavier than a piece of paper had any right to feel. He broke the seal and read the 3 lines inside twice. Naruto. Come alone. Tell no one. Not even your team. This conversation does not leave this room. HS. His stomach did something complicated. Part excitement, part dread, part something that didn't have a clean name. The particular feeling of a door you've been quietly hoping would open for years finally, actually, creaking on its hinges. He got dressed in under 2 minutes. The walk to the Hokage's tower felt longer than it had any right to feel, given that Naruto had made the trip 100 times before. Usually to get lectured about a prank, occasionally to pick up a mission scroll with the rest of his team. This time, though, every step felt weighted with a kind of significance he couldn't quite name, and by the time he reached the base of the tower, he'd counted the windows on the front facade twice without meaning to. Old habit. Or maybe not so old, given what we now know about him. The guards at the entrance waved him through without comment, which struck him as strange. Usually there was at least a bit of teasing from the older shinobi stationed there. A back again already, kid? Or a knowing smirk. Today, nothing. Just a nod and a gesture toward the stairs. If you're the kind of person who notices when a room gets quieter than it should be, hold on to that feeling. Because Naruto's about to walk into a conversation that's going to rewrite everything he thought he understood about his own future. He reached the top floor. The door to the Hokage's office was already open. Hiruzen Sarutobi sat behind his desk exactly as he had the night before, except now the scrolls that had been scattered across the surface in the small hours of the morning had been neatly cleared away, replaced by a single, unmarked document sitting squarely in the center of the desk, and a second, smaller scroll beside it, sealed with wax the color of dried blood. Close the door behind you, Hiruzen said, without looking up. Naruto did, and the click of the latch settling into place seemed unusually loud in the quiet room. Old man, what's this about? The messenger said. Sit down, Naruto. Something in the Hokage's voice made him stop mid-sentence. It wasn't unkind exactly, but it was different, heavier, more deliberate than the warm, slightly exasperated tone Naruto was used to hearing from him. This was the voice of the Hokage, not the voice of the old man who occasionally slipped him ramen money when no one was looking. Naruto sat. For a long moment, Hiruzen simply studied him, and Naruto, despite every instinct telling him to fill the silence with a joke, a complaint, anything to break the tension, found himself sitting still under that gaze, some part of him understanding, on a level deeper than conscious thought, that this was not a moment for noise. "Tell me about the mission to Kuragawa," Hiruzen finally said. "You already have Kakashi-sensei's report," Naruto said carefully. "I have Kakashi's report, yes." Hiruzen reached across the desk and picked up a second scroll, the one that had arrived through the window the night before, delivered by a masked hand that officially didn't exist. "I also have this." He set it down in front of Naruto, and Naruto's eyes flicked over the opening lines, and every drop of blood in his body seemed to go very cold at once. Target observed planting directional explosive charge under combat pressure. Blast radius calculated to disable enemy combatant, while preserving ally safety margin of less than 1 meter. Target subsequently issued tactical field commands to Jonin rank supervisor, commands followed without hesitation or challenge. He didn't need to read the rest. He already knew, with the sinking certainty of someone who has just watched a very carefully built wall crack down the middle, exactly what this document was and exactly what it meant. "You were watched," Hiruzen said quietly, "by one of my Anbu. Standard protocol on that route, given some recent unrest near the border, nothing to do with you specifically. But what they saw was..." He paused, searching for the right word, and settled on one that made Naruto's jaw tighten. "Illuminating." Silence stretched between them. Outside, somewhere below in the village, the ordinary sounds of morning continued, a vendor calling out prices, a dog barking, children laughing on their way to the academy, all of it feeling, in that moment, like it belonged to a completely different world than the one currently sitting inside this office. "I'm not going to insult you by pretending I don't already know part of the answer," Hiruzen said finally, folding his hands together on the desk. "You've been training yourself alone, for years, if the level of skill in that report is any indication. Explosive tag placement precise enough to avoid friendly casualties under combat stress isn't something a person picks up overnight, and it certainly isn't something taught in the standard academy curriculum." He leaned forward slightly. "So I'm going to ask you directly, and I want the truth, not the version of the truth you've been giving everyone else for 12 years. How long, Naruto?" For a moment, Naruto said nothing. His hands, resting on his knees, curled slowly into fists, and something in his expression shifted, the easy, deflecting grin nowhere in sight, replaced by something far more guarded, far older than a face that young should have been capable of. "Does it matter?" he asked quietly. "It matters to me." Naruto let out a slow breath, and when he spoke again, his voice had none of its usual bravado in it. "Since I was 7. Maybe 8. I started noticing things other kids didn't notice. How people moved, how rooms were laid out, where the exits were. I don't know why. It just started happening. And then I started practicing it. On my own. At night, mostly, when nobody was watching, because," he stopped himself. "Because?" Hiruzen prompted gently. "Because if I was good at something in front of people, they'd expect things from me," Naruto said. And there was an old bitterness underneath the words that made the Hokage's chest ache in a way he hadn't expected. "And every time somebody expected something from me, they got disappointed when I couldn't, when I wouldn't, show it the way they wanted. It was easier to just be the loud one. The failure. Nobody expects anything from the class clown. Nobody watches him too closely." He shrugged, a gesture that tried for careless and landed somewhere closer to exhausted. "So I got good at things where nobody was grading me. Stealth. Reading people. Combat stuff I taught myself from scrolls I wasn't supposed to have access to. And I got good at hiding how good I was getting, because that seemed safer than the alternative." Hiruzen was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the words but everything underneath them. 12 years of a village failing a child by seeing exactly what it expected to see and nothing more. 12 years of a boy building an entire second self in the shadows because the first one had never been allowed room to breathe. "That," he said finally, "is one of the most quietly remarkable things I have heard in a very long time. And it is also," he added more gravely, "one of the saddest." Naruto didn't respond to that. He didn't quite know how. "I'm not going to lecture you about honesty right now," Hiruzen continued, sitting back in his chair. There will be time for that conversation another day, and it is a conversation we will have, because hiding this much from the people meant to protect you was not without risk. But right now, I have a different question to ask you. And I want you to think carefully before you answer, because the answer will change the entire shape of your life going forward. He reached for the sealed scroll sitting beside the unmarked document, the one with wax the color of dried blood, and set it down in front of Naruto without opening it. What do you know about Anbu? Naruto blinked, caught off guard by the shift. The masked guys? Elite Black Ops. Answer directly to you. Nobody really knows who they are. He paused. Why? Because I have a proposition for you, Hiruzen said, and I want to be very clear before I say another word. What I am about to offer you is not something offered lightly, and it is not something offered to genin. Not ever. There is no precedent for this in Konoha's history, not in my lifetime, and possibly not in the village's entire existence. He let that sentence hang in the air for a moment before continuing. I want to bring you into the Anbu training program. Immediately. Under a masked identity, separate entirely from your genin status, invisible to your team, invisible to the council, invisible to every single person in this village except a small handful of people who will need to know for operational reasons. His eyes held Naruto's, steady and serious. You would continue your life exactly as it appears now, genin, Team 7 missions with Kakashi. But at night, and during periods when your team is not actively deployed, you would train and operate as one of my most closely guarded assets. If you're watching this and your jaw just hit the floor a little, trust me, so did Naruto's. Because what the Hokage just described isn't a promotion. It's not even really a job offer. It's an invitation into a completely different existence. One that would require Naruto to live 2 lives at once, starting today. You're serious, Naruto said slowly, when he finally found his voice again. Entirely. Why me? I mean, he gestured vaguely, as if trying to physically grab the right words out of the air. There's gotta be other kids who'd be better for this. Sasuke's a prodigy, everyone says so, his clan. Sasuke Uchiha is a remarkable combatant for his age, Hiruzen said, cutting him off gently but firmly. But Anbu is not, first and foremost, about combat ability. It is about judgment under pressure. It is about the capacity to disappear. To become, when necessary, invisible in a room full of people who are looking directly at you. It is about the willingness to make cold, difficult decisions in service of a mission, and the discipline to carry a secret so completely that even those closest to you never suspect its existence. He tapped the Anbu report on his desk. You have already been doing all of this. For years. Alone, without instruction, without support, and without a single person to notice the cost it was taking on you. What I am offering is not a burden I am placing on your shoulders for the first time, Naruto. It is training, structure, and purpose for a burden you have already been carrying since you were a small child. Naruto stared at the desk, at the sealed scroll sitting there like a held breath, and something in his chest tightened in a way he didn't fully have words for. What happens if I say no? He asked quietly. Then you say no, Hiruzen said simply. You continue as you are. Nothing about this conversation leaves this room, and nothing changes for you except that an old man sleeps slightly easier knowing there is one more person in this village who understands, even partially, what you're capable of. There is no punishment for refusal, Naruto. This is a choice, not an order. And if I say yes? Hiruzen's expression grew more solemn. Then your life changes today, in ways you cannot fully anticipate yet. You will train harder than you have ever trained, under people who will not go easy on you simply because of your age. You will be asked, likely sooner than either of us would prefer, to do things that will weigh on you, decisions that don't come with clean answers, missions that don't always end the way we hope. You will carry a secret that, if discovered by the wrong people, could put not just you but everyone you care about at risk. And you will do all of this while continuing to smile and joke and play the fool in front of your team every single day, because the moment that mask slips, the entire arrangement collapses. He paused. It is, in every sense, a harder path than the one you are currently on. I will not pretend otherwise to make it more appealing. Naruto sat with that for a long moment, and if you're expecting him to answer right away, if you think this is the kind of decision a 12-year-old makes without thinking it through, you clearly haven't. been paying close enough attention to the boy we've spent this chapter getting to know. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Of course. That night, the ambush. If your Anbu guy hadn't been watching, and things had gone worse than they did, would you have found out about any of this? Or would I have just kept hiding it until something actually went wrong? Hiruzen was quiet for a moment, because it was, he realized, an uncomfortably sharp question for a boy his age to ask, and an uncomfortably honest one for him to have to answer. Likely the latter, he admitted. And that is precisely why I am not willing to let this conversation end without an offer on the table. Because you are right to imply what you're implying, Naruto. A talent this significant, hidden this completely, left without guidance, is not a stable arrangement. Eventually the stakes would have caught up to the skill. I would rather that reckoning happen under my supervision, with proper training and proper support, than alone, on some mission where I am not fortunate enough to have eyes on the ground. Naruto nodded slowly, and something in his posture shifted, not quite decided yet, but leaning, the way a tree leans before it finally falls in a chosen direction. There's something else, he said quietly, and this time when he spoke, the words came slower, like he was working out the shape of them as he said them out loud for what might have been the very first time. Everyone in this village looks at me and sees a screw-up. A joke. The demon brat some people still whisper about when they think I can't hear them. His jaw tightened. I've spent my whole life being underestimated, and I got good at using that. But I'm tired of it only mattering to me. I'm tired of being the strongest secret nobody knows exists. He looked up, and there was something fierce in his eyes now, something that had nothing to do with the class clown persona he wore like a second skin. If I do this, if I say yes, it's not because I want a mask or a title. It's because I want to actually protect people. Really protect them. Not the fake, watered-down version I've been stuck doing in genin missions where I have to hold back so nobody asks questions. I want to use what I've built for something that actually matters. Hiruzen studied him for a long moment, and something in the old man's chest, something that had been quietly aching since he read that report the night before, settled, just slightly, into something that felt almost like hope. Then I believe, he said quietly, that you already have your answer? Naruto looked down at the sealed scroll sitting on the desk between them. Blood-red wax. No markings on the outside. The kind of document that, once opened, could not be unopened. What's in it? He asked. A blood contract, Hiruzen said. Standard for Anbu induction. It binds you to absolute secrecy regarding operations, identities, and the existence of the program itself, under penalty that I will not sugarcoat for you. The consequences for breaking an Anbu blood seal are severe, and I want you to understand that fully before you sign it. This is not a decision you can reverse in 6 months if you decide you'd rather go back to being just a genin. Once you're in, until either your service concludes formally or circumstances beyond your control end it another way. That's intense, Naruto said, and for the first time in the conversation, a flicker of nervousness crossed his face. It is meant to be, Hiruzen said, not unkindly. Anbu is not a game, Naruto, and I would be doing you a disservice to make it sound like one. I am asking a 12-year-old to shoulder a burden that breaks grown adults on a regular basis. I would not be asking at all if I did not believe, based on everything I have seen in that report, and everything I now understand about the way you've carried yourself for the last 12 years, that you are capable of it. Naruto reached out and picked up the scroll, turning it over slowly in his hands, feeling the weight of the wax seal beneath his thumb. My team, he said quietly. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura, Sasuke. They really can't know any of it? No one can know, Hiruzen confirmed. Not your teammates, not your instructors, not anyone outside a very small circle I will introduce you to shortly. The effectiveness of the entire program depends on absolute compartmentalization. If your team suspects, even slightly, that you are anything other than the genin they believe you to be, the value of your position, and your safety within it, is compromised. That's going to be hard, Naruto admitted. Lying to them. Every day. Yes, Hiruzen said simply. It will be. I will not pretend that it won't cost you something, Naruto. This path asks for real sacrifice, and one of the heaviest costs is the distance it will place, at times, between you and the people you care about most. That is a genuine price, and you deserve to walk into this with your eyes open to it, not blind to it. Naruto was quiet for a long moment, turning the scroll over one more time in his hands. Then he looked up, and the decision was already written plainly across his face before he even said the words out loud. Where do I sign? If you've made it this far and you're leaning forward in your seat right now, good, because this is exactly the moment this whole channel exists for. This is the hinge point. Everything from here forward is different. Hiruzen allowed himself the smallest, most careful exhale of relief before reaching for a small ceremonial blade kept in the top drawer of his desk. Old, plain, unremarkable to look at, but carrying with it the weight of every single operative who had ever passed through this exact ritual before signing their name away to a life in the shadows. This will require a blood signature, he said, sliding the blade across the desk. A small cut is sufficient. Press your thumb to the seal once the wound is open. Naruto took the blade without hesitation, which, notably, did not surprise Hiruzen in the slightest, given everything he now understood about the boy sitting across from him, and made a small, precise cut across the pad of his thumb, wincing only slightly. He unrolled the scroll. The contract itself was written in dense, formal script, clauses about secrecy and conduct, and the chain of command stretching down the length of the parchment, and at the bottom, a blank circle waiting for a mark that would bind him to all of it. He pressed his thumb to the seal. The parchment reacted instantly, a faint pulse of chakra rippling outward from the point of contact, characters along the edge of the document shimmering briefly gold before settling back into ordinary black ink, the unmistakable sign of a completed binding technique. It was done. From this moment forward, Hiruzen said quietly, taking the scroll back and rolling it carefully closed, you are, unofficially and invisibly, a trainee of the Anbu Black Ops Division of Konoha. Your genin status remains unchanged and public. This second identity does not exist on paper anywhere outside this office and one additional secure location. Do you understand the weight of what you have just agreed to? Yeah, Naruto said, and his voice, though quiet, carried none of the hesitation it had a few minutes earlier. I understand. Hiruzen studied him for a long moment, this strange, remarkable boy who had spent 12 years being failed by almost everyone around him and had somehow, against every reasonable expectation, come out the other side of it not broken but sharpened, and something in the old man's chest tightened with a feeling that was equal parts pride and worry. Then there is one more thing that needs to happen today, he said, rising from his desk. Your training cannot begin under my direct supervision alone. I have a village to run, and Anbu operates under its own command structure for good reason. You will need a mentor, someone experienced enough to shape raw talent into something reliable, and someone I trust enough to keep this arrangement exactly as invisible as it needs to be. He moved to the window and made a single, sharp gesture, a summons Naruto didn't recognize, but one that clearly meant something to whoever was meant to receive it, because less than 10 seconds later, the air near the far wall of the office shifted, and a figure dropped into the room with barely a whisper of sound. The figure who knelt before the Hokage's desk wore a mask carved into the sharp, angular features of a wolf, weathered enough to show years, maybe decades, of field use. Beneath the mask, what little skin was visible looked hardened, scarred faintly along the jaw in a way that spoke of old, close-range violence survived rather than avoided. The chakra radiating off this person, even suppressed, felt like standing near a bank of coiled wire, controlled, but unmistakably dangerous. Hokage-sama. The voice beneath the mask was low, flat, giving away nothing. Wolf, Hiruzen said. I have a new trainee for you. There was a pause, brief, but unmistakable, before the masked figure turned their heads slightly toward Naruto, taking him in with a scrutiny that made the boy's skin prickle. Not unkind, exactly, but utterly without warmth, and utterly without the reflexive gentleness most adults extended toward children without thinking about it. With respect, Hokage-sama, Wolf said slowly, this is a child. This child, Hiruzen said, sliding the Anbu field report across the desk toward the masked operative, neutralized an ambush of 5 armed missing nin 2 days ago using tactics and battlefield judgment that would not embarrass a seasoned chunin, let alone a genin. Read it before you form your opinion. Wolf picked up the report and read it in silence, and Naruto watched, trying and mostly failing to seem like he wasn't watching, as the masked figure's posture shifted, incrementally, from open skepticism to something more careful, more considering. This is... Wolf paused, seeming to choose the next word deliberately. Unusual. It is, Hiruzen agreed. Which is precisely why I want him under proper guidance rather than continuing to develop these instincts alone, unsupervised, and unchecked. I am assigning him to your training rotation, effective immediately. Wolf lowered the report slowly, masked gaze settling on Naruto again, longer this time, more evaluating. I don't coddle trainees, Hokage-sama. Age has never earned anyone special treatment under my supervision, and it won't start now. I wouldn't want it to, Hiruzen said. That is precisely why I've chosen you. For a long moment, Wolf said nothing, simply studying the boy in front of them, the boy who, if this report was accurate, might genuinely be sitting on the kind of raw, unpolished talent that came along once in a generation, buried under 12 years of a village's collective failure to look closely enough. It was, Wolf had to admit privately, an intriguing puzzle. Whether it was worth the very real risk of training a child this young into this life remained, for now, an open question. Fine, Wolf said finally, rising to full height. Training begins tonight. Midnight. The East Training Grounds, the ones sealed off from public access. The masked head tilted slightly toward Naruto. Don't be late. And don't expect me to go easy on you because of that report. If anything, it means I'll be pushing harder. Talent wasted through carelessness is worse than talent that never existed at all. I wasn't planning on being late, Naruto said, and something in his voice, steady, unbothered by the clear challenge in Wolf's tone, made the masked operative pause for just a fraction of a second before turning back toward the window. We'll see, Wolf said, and then, without further ceremony, vanished from the room as silently as they'd arrived, leaving nothing behind but a faint stir of displaced air. Naruto let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, and Hiruzen allowed himself a small, tired smile. Wolf is one of the finest instructors this division has ever produced, he said. Difficult. Demanding. Occasionally cold, if I'm honest with you. But there is no one I trust more to push you into the shape you'll need to be in for what lies ahead. He paused. I won't lie to you, Naruto, the road from here is not an easy one. What you agreed to today is going to cost you sleep, comfort, and time with the people you care about. There will be nights you question whether it was worth it. I don't regret it, Naruto said, and he meant it, the words settling into his chest with a certainty that surprised even him. For once, somebody's actually asking what I can do instead of deciding for me what I can't. I'm not gonna waste that. Hiruzen studied him for a long moment, and in that boy's face, stubborn, determined, carrying far more weight than any 12-year-old should ever have to carry alone, he saw, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last, a flicker of something that made him wonder, quietly, privately, just how far this path might eventually lead. Go home and rest, if you can, he said finally. You'll need it. Midnight will come faster than you think. Naruto nodded, rose from his seat, and made his way toward the door, and it was only as his hand touched the handle that Hiruzen spoke again, his voice softer now, almost paternal. Naruto. He turned back. Whatever this path asks of you, the old man said quietly, know that you did not have to earn the right to be seen. You already had it. It simply took the rest of us far too long to look. Naruto didn't quite know how to respond to that, so he didn't try. He just nodded once, and slipped out the door, leaving the Hokage alone with a sealed contract, a heavy conscience, and the quiet, uneasy hope that he had just done something that would, eventually, be worth every risk it carried. That night, long after the sun had gone down and the village had settled into its usual quiet hum, Naruto stood at the edge of the sealed eastern training grounds precisely 3 minutes before midnight, orange jacket left behind at home, dressed instead in plain, dark clothing that made him nearly invisible in the tree line's shadow. He didn't know yet what the next months would ask of him. He didn't know about the missions that would test him in ways no genin assignment ever could, the mentor waiting in the darkness ahead who would push him harder than anyone in his life ever had, or the mask that would, eventually, come to feel more honestly him than his own face sometimes did. He didn't know that this single night, this quiet, unremarkable walk to a sealed training ground under cover of darkness, was the first step of a road that would end, faster than anyone could have predicted, with him standing at the head of his own Anbu squad, the youngest captain in the history of the Hidden Leaf Village. But standing there in the dark, waiting for a masked stranger to appear and change his life forever. Naruto Uzumaki felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. He felt ready. A figure dropped silently from the trees ahead of him, wolf mask catching a thin sliver of moonlight. "You're early," Wolf said, sounding almost approving. "Good. That's the last easy thing you'll do tonight." And somewhere in the darkness beyond the tree line, training that would reshape the future of the Hidden Leaf Village began. The first thing Naruto learned about Wolf was that the man did not believe in warm-ups. "On your feet." Again. Naruto pushed himself up off the packed dirt of the sealed training ground for what had to be the 11th time in the last 20 minutes, arms trembling, lungs burning in the cold night air. Sweat had soaked through the back of his dark shirt despite the chill, and somewhere in the last half hour he'd stopped being able to feel his knuckles. "You're telegraphing your weight shift before every strike," Wolf said, circling him slowly, voice as flat and unbothered as if he were commenting on the weather rather than watching a child fail to land a single clean hit against him. "A trained opponent will see it a full half-second before you commit. That half-second is the difference between landing a blow and losing an arm. Kinda hard to fix my weight shift when you keep throwing me into the dirt," Naruto muttered, spitting out a bit of grit that had found its way into his mouth. "Then stop letting me throw you into the dirt." Wolf's tone didn't change at all. Again, Naruto had assumed, foolishly, he now realized, that whatever training he'd cobbled together for himself over the years, alone, at night, with nobody watching, had actually amounted to something. He'd disabled 5 armed missing men 2 nights ago. He'd felt, in that moment, genuinely capable. Wolf had disassembled that confidence in under 15 minutes. "You rely too heavily on reading terrain and setting up the fight before it starts," Wolf continued, settling back into a ready stance that looked almost lazy. Except Naruto now understood that nothing about this man's movement was ever actually lazy. That instinct is good, rare, even, for someone your age. But it means you've never had to fight someone who refuses to let the terrain matter. "I intend to be exactly that person for the next several months." "Great," Naruto muttered. "Can't wait." If you're wondering whether Wolf's brutal teaching style ever lightens up, hold that thought, because the answer is going to surprise you eventually. But that's a long way off from tonight. They trained until nearly 4 in the morning. By the end of it, Naruto could barely lift his arms above his shoulders, his knuckles were split and swollen, and he'd been knocked flat on his back so many times he'd genuinely lost count somewhere after the 20th. But somewhere in that exhausting blur of failure after failure, something had started, faintly, to click. By the final exchange of the night, Naruto managed, for the very first time, to read Wolf's opening feint half a second before the follow-through landed, and while he still ended up on the ground a moment later, it was a different kind of ending on the ground. A closer one. Wolf paused above him, masked head tilting slightly, and for just a moment, something in the stillness felt less like evaluation and more like the smallest flicker of approval. "That's the first hit you've actually seen coming tonight," Wolf said. "Remember what that felt like. That's the standard now, not the exception." "Feels like you barely noticed," Naruto groaned from the ground, staring up at the fading stars. "I noticed," Wolf said simply, extending a hand to pull him up. "Go home. Sleep what little of the night you have left. You have a genin team to perform for in 5 hours, and if you show up to that team looking like you spent the night getting thrown around a training ground, questions will get asked that neither of us wants answered." Naruto took the offered hand and let himself be hauled upright, wincing at the ache already settling deep into muscles he hadn't fully appreciated the existence of until tonight. "How am I supposed to hide this? I look like I got run over." "You'll learn," Wolf said. "Concealment isn't only about chakra suppression and staying out of sight. It's about controlling what your body tells people even when you're standing right in front of them. Pain management. Posture. Expression discipline. We'll cover it." For now, the masked figure paused, studying him for a moment. "Ice your knuckles, and invent a believable lie for the swelling. You have 5 hours. Use them wisely." And with that, Wolf was gone, vanishing into the tree line without another word, leaving Naruto alone in the empty training ground with the first gray hint of dawn beginning to creep along the horizon. He looked down at his split, swollen knuckles and let out a long, exhausted breath. Believable lie. Right. No problem. He had absolutely no idea, in that moment, just how quickly that particular skill was about to be tested. Team 7 met at their usual bridge at 9 o'clock sharp, and Naruto arrived exactly on time, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets to hide the worst of the bruising along his knuckles. Moving with a stiffness he was doing his best to disguise as ordinary morning grogginess. It very nearly worked. "You look terrible," Sakura said the second she caught sight of him, eyes narrowing with the particular sharpness of someone whose medical training had taught her to notice things other people missed. "Did you even sleep?" "Course I slept," Naruto said, forcing a wide, easy grin that cost him considerably more effort than it should have. "Just, training. Late-night training. Wanted to work on my form after everything that happened on the mission." It wasn't technically a lie, which was, as Naruto was rapidly learning, the best kind of lie to tell, the kind built on a foundation of truth solid enough that nobody thought to dig deeper. Sakura's eyes lingered on him a moment longer than he would have liked, but before she could press further, Sasuke's voice cut in, flat and appraising in a way that made Naruto's pulse spike slightly. "Your hands." Naruto froze for half a second, a mistake he immediately recognized. Tensing was exactly the kind of tell Wolf had spent all night warning him about, before recovering with a shrug that he hoped looked more careless than it felt. "Punched a tree a bunch of times. Training thing. You should try it sometime, might loosen up that permanent frown of yours." Sasuke's dark eyes didn't leave him for a long moment, something calculating and quiet moving behind them, and Naruto had the distinct, uncomfortable sensation of being read the way he himself had learned to read other people, assessed, filed away, not fully believed. Sasuke said eventually, which from him could have meant almost anything, and turned away toward the middle of the bridge without further comment. Naruto let out a breath slowly through his nose, careful not to let the relief show too plainly on his face. One down. Way too many more of these to go. If you've ever had to lie to someone you actually care about, even for a good reason, you know exactly how heavy that particular kind of relief feels. It's relief and guilt, tangled up together, and it doesn't get lighter with practice. It just gets more familiar. Kakashi arrived 20 minutes later than usual, which, for Kakashi, wasn't remarkable at all, but the moment his visible eye settled on Naruto, something in his expression sharpened in a way that made Naruto's stomach twist uncomfortably. "Naruto," Kakashi said, once Sakura and Sasuke had drifted a few steps away to bicker about something unrelated. "A word." Naruto followed him a short distance down the bridge, out of easy earshot, and Kakashi studied him with an intensity that felt entirely different from Sakura's simple concern or Sasuke's flat suspicion. This felt like a man carefully weighing exactly how much he already suspected against how much he was willing to say out loud. "You've been different since Kuragawa," Kakashi said quietly. "I got some experience," Naruto said carefully. "That's all." "That's not all, and we both know it." Kakashi's tone wasn't accusatory, exactly, more measured, patient, the tone of a man laying groundwork rather than confronting someone outright. "I'm not going to push you on this right now, Naruto. But I want you to understand something. I've been doing this a long time. I recognize what I saw on that road, and I recognize the kind of training that produces it, and I recognize this." His gaze flicked, deliberately, toward Naruto's bruised knuckles, as evidence that something in your life changed very recently and very significantly. Naruto's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't say anything. "Whatever it is," Kakashi continued, voice dropping lower, "I hope you know you can trust me with it, eventually, when you're ready. I won't force the issue before then. But don't insult either of us by pretending there's nothing here to discuss." For a long moment, Naruto held his sensei's gaze, and something in him, the part of him that had spent 12 years quietly aching for exactly this kind of person, someone paying close enough attention to actually notice, wanted badly to just tell him everything. The training. The mask waiting for him at midnight. The blood contract sealed onto his thumb 2 nights ago. He didn't. "There's nothing to discuss," he said instead, and the words tasted like ash in his mouth even as he forced the familiar grin back into place over them. "I'm just getting stronger, sensei. Isn't that supposed to be a good thing?" Kakashi studied him a moment longer, and something in his single visible eye looked, for just a fraction of a second, disappointed, not in Naruto, exactly, but in the distance the boy had just deliberately placed between them. "It is," he said finally. I just hope you remember you don't have to get stronger entirely alone. He turned and walked back toward the rest of the team before Naruto could formulate any kind of response, and Naruto stood there for a long moment on the bridge, feeling, for the first time since signing that contract, the true weight of exactly what he'd agreed to. This wasn't just going to cost him sleep. It was going to cost him honesty with the people who actually cared whether he lived or died. And no matter how necessary Hiruzen's warnings had made that sacrifice sound in the abstract, standing here, watching Kakashi's back as he walked away, it didn't feel abstract at all. Let's fast forward a bit, because what comes next is less a single moment and more a pattern. The pattern that's going to define the next several weeks of Naruto's life, and honestly, it's kind of a lot to take in all at once. So buckle up. By day, Naruto was, to any outside observer, exactly the same as he'd always been. He showed up to D-rank missions with his usual complaints about weeding gardens and chasing escaped cats. He ate lunch with his team, argued with Sasuke about nothing in particular, let Sakura fuss over minor scrapes she assumed came from ordinary training. He went to the ramen stand 3 times a week, same as always, and told the same jokes to the same shop owner, and if anyone had been watching closely enough, which, notably, almost nobody was, they might have noticed that his laugh, while still loud, occasionally arrived a half-second later than it used to, like it was being deployed rather than simply felt. By night, everything was different. Wolf's training ground became the site of an education more brutal and more precise than anything Naruto had ever imagined possible. Chakra control drills that left him shaking with exhaustion by the second hour. Silent movement exercises conducted across gravel, across dry leaves, across surfaces specifically chosen because they made silence nearly impossible. And Wolf's unforgiving insistence that nearly impossible was not the same as impossible, and that the difference was the entire point, again, became the word Naruto heard more than any other word in his life during those weeks. Blade work. Improvised trap construction. Interrogation resistance drills that left him rattled in ways he didn't fully understand until well after they'd ended. Wolf didn't just teach him to fight, he taught him to think 3 moves ahead of a fight, to consider not just how to win an engagement but how to avoid one entirely when winning wasn't worth the cost, and how to read a room, a person, an entire mission briefing for the details that mattered buried underneath the details that didn't. You have good instincts, Wolf told him, maybe 3 weeks into the training, after a particularly grueling session on reading enemy chakra signatures through concealment techniques. It was the closest thing to a genuine compliment the man had offered so far, and Naruto, despite his exhaustion, found himself absurdly pleased by it. Untrained but good. The problem with untrained instincts is that they're inconsistent. Brilliant one moment, catastrophically wrong the next, because you've never had anyone teach you to distinguish between the two in real time. That's what the next several months are for. How long is this gonna take? Naruto asked, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a bruised hand. Before I'm, actually Anbu. Officially. That depends entirely on you, Wolf said. Some trainees take years. Some, with the right combination of natural aptitude and discipline, move faster. A pause, considering. You are, unfortunately for my sleep schedule, shaping up to be the second kind. Naruto grinned, tired but genuine. Was that a compliment? It was an observation, Wolf said, entirely without warmth, and Naruto laughed. Actually laughed, not the deployed half-second late kind he'd been performing all day for his team, but something real, something that came from an increasingly rare place of feeling for once, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. If there's one thing this double life is giving him that his old, single life never quite managed, it's this. A place where his effort is actually being measured accurately. A mentor who doesn't grade him against expectations built on 12 years of misunderstanding, but against what he's actually capable of, right now, in real time. It's not a fair trade for the lying. But it's not nothing either. The near misses started piling up faster than Naruto would have liked. There was the morning Sakura noticed a fresh cut along his forearm, a training injury from a blade drill gone slightly wrong the night before, and he had to invent, on the spot, an elaborate story about accidentally cutting himself on a fence while chasing down the same escaped cat they'd caught the previous week. Sakura, ever the practical one, had insisted on cleaning and bandaging it herself, her gentle, careful hands moving with the same efficiency she brought to every act of care she performed for her teammates, entirely unaware that the wound beneath her fingers had come from something far more dangerous than offense. There was the afternoon Sasuke caught him practicing a hand seal sequence under his breath while they waited for Kakashi to arrive for training, muscle memory slipping out unconsciously, the way habits do when you're tired enough, and Naruto had to scramble to claim it was a technique he'd read about in a scroll from the library, badly performed and half-remembered, rather than the polished, precise sequence Wolf had drilled into him only hours before. Sasuke hadn't looked convinced. But he hadn't pushed, either, not yet, and Naruto found himself increasingly aware that whatever suspicion Sasuke was quietly accumulating, it wasn't going to stay quiet forever. And then there was the night that very nearly ended everything before it had properly begun. It happened almost exactly a month into his training, on a night that should have been unremarkable. Naruto had finished a particularly grueling session with Wolf, a full 4 hours dedicated entirely to silent infiltration technique, the kind of exhausting, hyper-focused work that left his chakra reserves thin and his reflexes running on nothing but discipline. And he was making his way back toward his apartment in the pale gray light just before dawn, moving with the careful, practiced quiet Wolf had spent weeks drilling into him. He did not expect to run into Sakura. She was sitting on a low wall near the edge of the residential district, wrapped in a light shawl against the early morning chill, a canteen of warm tea cradled in both hands, steam curling faintly into the cold air. Her eyes, when they landed on him, widened with a mixture of surprise and immediate, sharp concern. Naruto? What are you doing out here? It's not even light yet. For one horrible, frozen half-second, Naruto's entire mind went completely blank. Every carefully constructed cover story, every lie he'd rehearsed for exactly this kind of scenario, simply evaporated under the sudden, immediate pressure of Sakura's very real, very present concern. Think. This is exactly the kind of thing Wolf warned you about. Improvise, don't freeze. Couldn't sleep, he said, and the words came out rougher than he intended, exhaustion bleeding through despite his best efforts. Went for a walk. Clears my head sometimes. Sakura's brow furrowed, studying him with an expression that made his stomach twist unpleasantly. You've been doing that a lot lately. The weird training hours, the bruises, the way you've been kind of quieter sometimes, when you think no one's paying attention. She hesitated, and something in her voice softened, worry replacing suspicion. Naruto, is everything okay? You know you can talk to me, right? To any of us? And here's the thing, here's the part that made this moment so much harder than any of Wolf's training drills, because nothing Wolf taught him prepared him for the specific, aching difficulty of looking his actual friend in the eye and lying to her face while she offered him exactly the kind of care he'd spent his whole life wishing someone would offer. Yeah, he said quietly, and made himself smile, even though it felt like it cost him something real to do it. Everything's fine, Sakura. I promise. I've just been pushing myself harder lately, trying to catch up, you know? After everything that happened on the Kuragawa mission, I don't want to be the one who almost gets everyone killed because I wasn't strong enough. It wasn't entirely a lie. That part, at least, was true, buried underneath everything else, that fear was real, and letting a sliver of real feeling show through the cover story was, Naruto was discovering, the difference between a lie that held and one that didn't. Sakura's expression softened further, some of the sharp suspicion melting into something gentler. You already are strong, you know, she said. You saved us out there. I don't think I ever properly said that. She hesitated, then added quieter, just don't push yourself so hard you break, okay? We need you. All of you, not just the strong parts. Something in Naruto's chest tightened uncomfortably at that, guilt curling and low and sharp beneath the relief of having navigated the immediate danger. Yeah, he said softly. I hear you. She studied him a moment longer, then offered him a small, warm smile, holding out her canteen. Want some? It's just tea, but it's warm, and you look half frozen. He took it, grateful for the small, ordinary kindness of it, and the two of them sat together on the low wall for a few minutes as the sky slowly lightened from gray to pale gold, talking about nothing important, the weather, an upcoming exam, whether Kakashi would ever actually show up on time to anything ever again, and for those few minutes, Naruto let himself simply be a genin sitting with his friend in the early morning, Nothing more complicated than that. It didn't last. It never did these days. But it mattered anyway. He didn't tell Wolf about the encounter that night, not directly, not in detail. But the mentor seemed to sense, from the particular quality of Naruto's distraction during their next session, that something had shifted. "You're compartmentalizing poorly tonight," Wolf observed, after Naruto failed, for the third time in a row, to properly execute a technique he mastered cleanly just 2 nights earlier. "Something is bleeding through from your other life into this one. That is not acceptable." "Sorry," Naruto muttered, frustrated with himself. "Just had a close call. With one of my teammates. Nearly blew the whole thing wide open just by being tired at the wrong moment." Wolf was quiet for a moment, studying him with that unreadable masked stillness that Naruto had, over the past month, slowly learned to interpret in small, subtle shifts of posture. "This will not be the last close call," Wolf said finally. "I want to be honest with you about that, because I suspect no one else has been. The people who care about you are perceptive, Naruto. I've read enough of your team's mission reports to understand that much. They will continue to notice things. The goal is not to eliminate every close call. That is not possible, not for the length of time this arrangement will require. The goal is to become skilled enough at managing those moments that they never become confirmations." "That sounds exhausting," Naruto admitted. "It is," Wolf said, without a trace of sympathy softening the word. "That is the job. Not the fighting. Anyone can learn to fight. The exhausting part, the part that actually separates an operative who lasts from one who doesn't, is precisely this: the discipline to carry 2 entire lives at once without letting either one collapse into the other." A pause. "Most people cannot sustain it long term. It costs something real, every single day, and there is no version of this path where it doesn't." Naruto absorbed that in silence for a long moment, thinking of Sakura's warm tea and gentle concern, of Sasuke's narrowed, calculating eyes, of Kakashi's quiet, patient offer of trust that Naruto had turned away from on the bridge. "Is it worth it?" he asked finally, more to himself than to Wolf. "All of this?" Wolf considered the question with more genuine weight than Naruto expected. "I cannot answer that for you," the masked operative said eventually. "Every operative who has ever worn this mask has had to answer it for themselves, usually more than once, usually at moments considerably worse than this one. What I can tell you is this: the cost is real, but so is the good this work makes possible. People who never learn your name will be alive because of choices you make in the dark. That will never balance out cleanly on a scale, Naruto. It simply is what it is. You'll have to decide, again and again, whether it's a trade you're willing to keep making." It wasn't a comforting answer. But it was, Naruto thought, an honest one, and honesty, increasingly, felt like the rarest and most valuable thing in his strange, split-apart life. "Okay," he said finally, squaring his shoulders, exhaustion and doubt folding back down beneath a familiar, stubborn resolve. "Then let's keep going. I'm not backing out now." Something in Wolf's posture shifted again, not quite a smile, masks didn't allow for that, but something adjacent to approval. "Good," the mentor said. "Because your first live field test is in 3 days, and I intend for you to be ready." Naruto's stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. "Field test," he repeated slowly. "As in, actual Anbu mission field test?" "As in exactly that," Wolf confirmed. "You've made faster progress than I anticipated when the Hokage first brought you to me a month ago. Faster, frankly, than almost any trainee I've overseen in my career. Your close-quarters combat is still developing, but your judgment, your read on terrain and threat patterns, your discipline under pressure, those are, at this point, well past what I would expect from someone your age, and arguably past what I'd expect from most chunin. So what's the test?" "A live extraction," Wolf said. "Low-risk profile, extensively scouted in advance, 2 senior operatives supervising alongside you at all times. You will not be leading. You will not be making the critical calls. But you will be operating in the field, under my direct oversight, in a scenario with genuine stakes rather than a training simulation." The masked head tilted slightly. "This is the moment the Hokage and I determine whether the instincts you've shown in training translate to a live environment where the danger is real and the margin for error is considerably smaller." Naruto swallowed hard, a complicated tangle of fear and anticipation settling into his chest. A month ago, he'd been a genin dismissed by nearly everyone around him, quietly nursing a talent nobody bothered to look for. Now he was 3 days away from his first genuine Anbu field operation. What if I mess it up? He asked quietly, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Then you will have failed a training exercise, and we will adjust your instruction accordingly, Wolf said, matter-of-fact in a way that was, in its own strange manner, oddly reassuring. This is not a mission with catastrophic stakes riding on your individual performance, Naruto. It is designed, deliberately, to be survivable even if you make mistakes. That is the entire point of a supervised field test, to find your limits somewhere controlled, before you find them somewhere that isn't. Naruto nodded slowly, some of the tightness in his chest easing, just slightly, at the reassurance. 3 days, he repeated. 3 days, Wolf confirmed. Rest when you can. Eat properly, actual meals, not whatever instant approximation of food I suspect you've been surviving on. And Naruto, the mentor paused, and something in the tone shifted, just slightly, into something almost gentle. You've earned this. Whatever doubts are running through your head right now, set them aside long enough to recognize that. A month ago, most people in this village couldn't have told you what you were capable of. 3 days from now, you're going to show 2 senior NBU operatives exactly what they've been missing. It wasn't much. But coming from Wolf, after a month of relentless, uncompromising drilling, it landed like something far heavier than a simple sentence had any right to land. Thanks, Naruto said quietly, and meant it more than the single word could really carry. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended kind of tension, Naruto moving through his ordinary genin routine with Team 7 by day, D-rank missions and Kakashi's quiet, watchful patience and Sakura's continued gentle concern and Sasuke's persistent, narrowing suspicion, all of it layered over the growing, electric anticipation building beneath the surface of every single interaction. He caught himself, more than once, staring off into the middle distance during team briefings, running through infiltration patterns and contingency plans in his head instead of listening to whatever mundane D-rank assignment Kakashi was outlining, and had to force himself back into the present moment before anyone noticed the lapse. On the second night, Wolf ran him through the mission parameters in exacting, repetitive detail. A small, isolated safe house near the northern border, a defector requiring quiet extraction before a rival faction could silence them first. Low enemy presence expected but not guaranteed. 2 senior ANBU, designated Hawk and Falcon, providing direct oversight and backup throughout. Your role, Wolf explained, sketching the terrain layout onto a scrap of paper by lamplight, is reconnaissance and secondary support. You will not make first contact. You will not engage unless directly ordered to or unless the situation becomes unavoidable. Your job, first and foremost, is to observe, report, and follow instruction precisely. Do you understand? Observe, report, follow instruction, Naruto repeated. Got it. I mean it, Naruto, Wolf said, more seriously than usual. I have watched your instincts in training, and they are exceptional. But instinct without discipline gets people killed in the field. And this is not a training ground where the worst outcome is a bruise and a lesson learned. If Hawk or Falcon give you an order, you follow it immediately, without hesitation, even if some part of you thinks you see a better option. Are we clear? Something in the weight of that instruction settled heavily over Naruto, the reality of what he'd agreed to a month ago finally crystallizing into something concrete and immediate rather than abstract and future. Crystal clear, he said quietly. Wolf studied him a moment longer, then nodded, satisfied. Good. Then get some rest. Tomorrow night you become something this village has never had before, and I intend for it to go well. The following evening, Naruto told his team he wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be joining them for the low-priority D-rank scheduled for the next morning, a lie that Kakashi, notably, accepted with a quiet, searching look that suggested he believed considerably less of it than he let on, but chose, for now, not to push. By midnight, Naruto stood at the edge of the sealed training ground once more, dressed not in his usual dark training clothes but in something new, a plain, form-fitting set of ANBU standard gear that Wolf had provided him earlier that evening, lightweight and built for silent, efficient movement, along with a blank, unmarked mask he would wear for the very first time tonight, its features not yet carved into any particular animal or symbol, reserved for trainees who hadn't yet earned a permanent designation. He held it in both hands for a long moment, feeling the cool, smooth wood beneath his fingers, and something in his chest tightened with a mixture of fear and fierce, quiet pride he never quite felt in equal measure before. A month ago, I was the kid nobody could be bothered to notice. Tonight, I become something this village doesn't even know exists yet. He lifted the mask and settled it over his face. The world narrowed, sharpened, the edges of his vision framed now by the mask's carved eye holes, and something in his posture shifted almost immediately, spine straightening, shoulders settling, the last visible traces of the loud, clumsy genin persona folding neatly away beneath something quieter, more controlled. Wolf appeared beside him without a sound, alongside two additional masked figures, Hawk and Falcon, presumably, though Naruto had no way to confirm which was which, and for a long moment, all four of them stood in silence at the edge of the village, the sleeping rooftops stretching out below them under a clear, star-scattered sky. Ready? Wolf asked quietly. Naruto took one last breath, feeling the weight of the mask settle fully over his identity, and nodded once. Ready. The four figures dropped from the wall in near-perfect silence, moving north into the darkness beyond the village's edge, and somewhere out there, waiting in a small, isolated safe house near the border, a mission was about to unfold that would test, for the very first time, everything Naruto Uzumaki had spent a month secretly becoming. He had no idea, as he moved through the darkness that night, silent and masked and entirely unrecognizable as the boy his village thought they knew, that this mission was about to become the moment his instincts were forced past training and into something far more permanent, far more real, and far more dangerous than a supervised test was ever supposed to be. The four masked figures moved north through the darkness in near-perfect silence, cutting across open country and through sparse woodland with a fluid, practiced efficiency that made Naruto acutely aware, for the first time, of exactly how far he still had to go. Wolf led at a pace that never once looked hurried and yet somehow ate up distance at a rate Naruto struggled to match without his breathing giving him away. Hawk and Falcon flanked wide on either side, chakra signatures pulled down so tight they barely registered even to Naruto's increasingly sharpened senses. They reached the border region an hour before dawn, dropping into a shallow ravine roughly 400 meters from the target safehouse, a squat, unremarkable wooden structure tucked into a fold of hillside, dark windows, no visible movement. Position, Wolf murmured, voice pitched barely above breath. Report. Hawk, a broad-shouldered figure whose mask bore the sharp, downturned features of a bird of prey, crouched low at the ravine's edge, eyes fixed on the safe house through the pale pre-dawn gloom. No visible guards. One heat signature inside consistent with our intelligence on the defector. No secondary presence detected. A pause. Doesn't mean there isn't one. Agreed, Wolf said. Falcon, sweep the perimeter. Naruto, the masked head turned toward him, hold position here. Observe. Report anything that shifts. You do not move from this ravine without direct instruction. Understood? Understood, Naruto said quietly, and something in his chest tightened with the particular discipline of being told, explicitly, to hold back, a discipline that had never once come naturally to him, not in 12 years of being told to sit down, be quiet, wait his turn. But he'd promised Wolf he'd follow instruction precisely, and he intended to keep that promise. Falcon peeled away into the darkness without a sound, and for the next 20 minutes, nothing happened at all. Naruto crouched in the ravine beside Hawk, watching the safe house, cataloging every detail he could, the angle of the roofline, the single visible door, the two windows on the near side, the way the tree line pulled close to the structure's northern edge, close enough to offer cover for anyone approaching from that direction. If I were planning an ambush here, he thought, almost without meaning to, that's where I'd come from. He filed the observation away and said nothing, because Wolf had told him to observe and report, and this didn't yet feel like something worth interrupting the silence for. It was just a thought. An instinct. It would turn out to be the single most important instinct of the entire mission. Falcon returned roughly 25 minutes later, dropping back into the ravine with the same near-silent economy of motion the other two operatives carried. Perimeter's clean, they reported, voice low and clipped. No hostile presence detected within 300 meters in any direction I could cover. Good, Wolf said. Then we proceed as planned. Hawk, Falcon, approach from the south, make contact, confirm the defector's identity, and begin extraction. I'll hold the ravine with the trainee as overwatch. A pause, masked gaze flicking briefly toward Naruto. Standard protocol. Nothing about this should require improvisation. Hawk and Falcon nodded once and moved out, dropping low and crossing the open ground toward the safe house with a fluid, practiced stealth that made the 400 meters look almost effortless. Naruto watched them go, tension coiling tighter in his chest with every step they took, some instinct he couldn't fully name whispering that something about this felt wrong, even though nothing about the scene in front of him had actually changed. You're tense, Wolf observed quietly, beside him. Something feels off, Naruto admitted. I don't know what. Maybe it's nothing. Describe it. Naruto hesitated, turning the feeling over, trying to find words for something that was still mostly instinct rather than observation. The tree line, he said finally, nodding toward the northern edge of the safe house. It's close. Too close. If I were setting up a defense or an ambush, that's exactly where I'd want cover. Falcon swept the perimeter, but, he paused, did they actually clear that specific stretch, or just pass near it? Wolf was silent for a moment, considering the question with a stillness that suggested he was taking it seriously rather than dismissing it out of hand. A fair point, he admitted finally. Falcon's sweep pattern would have covered that ground, but a well-concealed presence with sufficient chakra suppression could theoretically avoid detection even under a thorough sweep, particularly this close to dawn when ambient chakra readings are naturally muddier. He raised a hand to his ear, activating a small communication seal. Hawk, Falcon, status. Static, then Hawk's voice, quiet and controlled. Approaching the door now. No change in the target's signature. Proceeding with contact. Copy, Wolf said, and lowered his hand, though something in his posture had shifted subtly, a fraction more alert than it had been a minute earlier. Keep watching that tree line, Naruto. If your instinct is right, we'll know soon enough. Naruto's eyes fixed on the dark line of trees pressing close against the safe house's northern wall. Every muscle in his body coiled with an anticipation he couldn't fully justify with anything concrete. Just a feeling. Just an instinct built from months of counting exits, and reading terrain nobody else had ever bothered to teach him to read. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute, and then the tree line moved. It happened fast. Faster than Naruto's conscious mind could process, though some deeper, trained part of him was already reacting before the thought fully formed. 3 shapes broke from the shadows at the base of the trees, converging on the safe house from an angle that put them directly behind Hawk and Falcon's approach. Chakra signatures flaring suddenly bright as concealment techniques dropped. The instant surprise became the priority over stealth. Ambush. Naruto's voice cracked out before he could stop himself, and beside him, Wolf was already moving, hand flashing through a rapid activation seal. Hawk, Falcon, 3 hostiles, northern flank, danger close. Wolf's voice carried none of its earlier quiet control, sharp now, urgent, cutting through the pre-dawn stillness. Fall back to the ravine, immediately, but it was already too late for a clean retreat. The 3 attackers closed the distance in seconds, and Naruto watched, heart hammering, as Hawk spun to meet the nearest threat while Falcon was forced to abandon the extraction entirely, blade already drawn, putting themselves between the enemy and the safe house door where the defector, still, presumably inside, remained dangerously exposed. Wolf, they're going to get cut off, Naruto said, watching the tactical picture unfold with a clarity that felt almost disconnected from the fear coiling in his stomach. If Hawk keeps engaging head-on, Falcon's going to be flanked in the next 10 seconds. There's a 4th signature, I can feel it, coming from the east side of the structure. Wolf's masked head snapped toward him. You're certain? I don't know how I know, I just... Naruto's jaw tightened. Yes. I'm certain. For half a second, Wolf hesitated, the weight of an entire mission's careful planning, of an explicit instruction to hold the ravine, of a month of drilled-in discipline, warring visibly against the urgency of the moment. Then the mentor made a decision that would end up mattering far more than either of them understood in that instant. With me. Stay behind my guard, follow my lead exactly, do not engage unless I give the order. Wolf was already moving as he spoke, and Naruto scrambled up out of the ravine after him, every drilled lesson from the past month screaming through his body at once. Silent movement, control breathing, read the terrain, don't telegraph your approach. As the two of them closed the distance toward the safe house at a dead sprint, they arrived to a scene already spiraling toward disaster. Hawk was locked in a brutal close-quarters exchange with two attackers simultaneously, blood visible along one forearm where a blade had found its mark, still fighting but clearly losing ground with every exchange. Falcon had been forced back against the safehouse wall, pinned by the third attacker's relentless assault, and, exactly as Naruto had predicted, a fourth figure was rounding the eastern corner of the structure, moving to flank Falcon's blind side with lethal, unhurried precision. Wolf didn't hesitate. He crossed the remaining distance in a burst of speed that left Naruto scrambling to keep pace, intercepting the flanking attacker with a strike that rang out sharp and final against drawn steel, driving the fourth enemy back several paces before either of them could fully engage. Naruto, the door! Wolf's voice cut through the chaos, urgent and sharp. Get the defector out, now, that's your priority. Do not engage the hostiles unless directly cornered. Do you understand me? Understood. Naruto broke away from the fight, sprinting the last stretch toward the safe house's front door, heart pounding, every instinct he'd spent a month sharpening screaming at him to move fast, move quiet, and above all, move smart. He hit the door at a controlled pace rather than a reckless one, exactly as Wolf had drilled into him. Check the frame, check for traps, don't just kick it open and hope for the best, and found it already ajar, hanging slightly off one hinge, evidence of forced entry that made his stomach drop. They already got inside. This isn't just an ambush on the approach. Someone breached the safe house itself. He slipped through the doorway low and fast, kunai drawn, senses stretched as wide as his month of training allowed, and found the safe house's single small room in a state of violent disarray. Furniture overturned, a lamp shattered on the floor, and in the far corner, pressed back against the wall with wide, terrified eyes, a man Naruto recognized immediately from the mission briefing as the defector they'd been sent to extract. He was not alone. A fifth attacker stood over him, blade already raised, close enough that there would be no time for Naruto to cross the room before the strike landed. There is a specific kind of decision that only exists in the space of half a second, the kind where your training either takes over completely or it doesn't, and there simply isn't enough time left for conscious thought to weigh in either way. Naruto's hand moved before his mind had fully caught up to what it was doing, kunai leaving his fingers in a throw calibrated with a precision he hadn't consciously calculated, not aimed to kill outright. Some deeper, trained instinct steering the throw toward the attacker's weapon arm rather than anything more lethal, a controlled strike meant to disrupt rather than end. It worked. Mostly. The kunai buried itself in the attacker's forearm, throwing off the angle of the strike just enough that the blade came down a half-foot wide of the defector's exposed throat, biting instead into the wooden floorboards with a violent crack. The attacker snarled, wrenching the kunai free with a spray of blood, and turned, no longer focused on the defector, but on the new, more immediate threat standing in the doorway. Naruto had exactly 1.5 seconds to process the fact that he was now facing a fully armed, enraged enemy combatant completely alone, with no backup, no terrain advantage, and no time to plan. This isn't a training drill. This isn't a supervised test. This is real, and if I get this wrong, someone dies. Maybe me. The attacker lunged. What happened next would occupy a significant portion of Wolf's after-action report, and an even larger portion of the private, unofficial notes the masked mentor would eventually submit directly to the Hokage. Because what happened next was not the performance of a trainee still finding his footing in his first live operation. Naruto sidestepped the initial strike with an economy of motion that owed everything to a month of relentless, unforgiving drilling, redirecting the attacker's own momentum with a controlled push that sent the man stumbling half a step past him. In the fraction of a second that followed, Naruto's second kunai was already in motion, not thrown this time, but driven in close, precise, aimed with the same disciplined restraint as the first strike, intended to disable rather than kill. It should have worked exactly like the first strike had. It didn't. The attacker, recovering faster than Naruto anticipated, twisted at the last possible instant, and what should have been a disabling strike to the shoulder instead found something far more vital as the man's own momentum carried him directly into the blade's path. The fight ended in absolute, ringing silence. Naruto stood frozen for a long moment, kunai still gripped tight in his hand, watching the attacker crumple to the floor in front of him, and something in his chest went very, very cold and very, very still. He had trained for this. Wolf had spent weeks preparing him, in the abstract, for exactly this eventuality, the reality that Anbu operatives sometimes had to take a life to protect another, that hesitation in the wrong moment could cost innocent people everything, that this was, ultimately, the darkest and most necessary weight the mask asked its wearer to carry. None of that training had actually prepared him for the way it would feel. It didn't feel like the mission reports he'd read described it. It didn't feel clean, or clinical, or distant. It felt like the floor had shifted slightly beneath his feet, like the room had gotten quieter than it should have been, even accounting for the fact that the fight itself had ended. Like some part of him, the part that was still, underneath everything, a 12-year-old boy who used to worry about failing academy exams, had just been asked a question he didn't yet have the emotional vocabulary to fully answer. Naruto. The defector's voice, shaky and hoarse, cut through the ringing silence. Is it safe? The question snapped Naruto back into the room, back into the mission, and whatever processing he needed to do about what had just happened was going to have to wait, because there was still a job to finish and people outside that door who were still fighting for their lives. It's safe, Naruto said, and his voice came out steadier than he expected, steadier than he felt. We need to move. Now. He helped the defector to his feet, checked the man for injuries with quick, efficient hands, a shallow cut along one arm, nothing like threatening, and guided him toward the door, kunai still drawn, senses stretched wide, every instinct honed over the past month working in overdrive to make sure he wasn't walking either of them into a second ambush. The scene outside had shifted in the brief time he'd been inside. Wolf had disabled the fourth attacker entirely, and Hawk, despite the bleeding along one arm, had finally gained the upper hand against the remaining two hostiles, driving them back toward the tree line with a series of controlled, efficient strikes. Falcon was already moving to secure the perimeter, ensuring no additional attackers remained in position. Defector secured, Naruto called out, forcing his voice into something approximating calm control, exactly the way Wolf had drilled him to communicate under pressure. One hostile down inside. He's not getting back up. Something in the way Naruto said those words, flat, controlled, carefully stripped of anything that might betray the storm underneath, made Wolf's masked head turn toward him for a fraction of a second longer than the tactical situation strictly required. Understood, Wolf said, voice giving away nothing. Hawk, Falcon, finish securing the perimeter. We move out in 2 minutes. The retreat back toward the village happened in a blur that Naruto would later have trouble fully reconstructing in detail. The defector moved between them under heavy guard, Hawk's arm hastily field-dressed, Falcon covering their rear, Wolf setting a pace fast enough to put real distance between them and the border before full daylight broke. Naruto moved through all of it on something like autopilot, his body executing every drilled instruction with perfect precision, while some separate part of his mind sat somewhere just slightly outside himself, replaying the moment in that small, dark room over and over, unable to quite settle it into something that made sense. I didn't mean to. I was trying to disable him, I wasn't trying to. He knew, intellectually, that the outcome had been the attacker's own momentum, the attacker's own miscalculation in trying to twist away from a strike aimed to wound rather than kill. He knew, intellectually, that if he'd hesitated even a fraction of a second longer, weighing the morality of the strike instead of committing to it, the defector behind him would very likely be dead, and possibly Naruto along with him. None of that intellectual understanding made the cold, heavy feeling in his chest any lighter. They reached the outskirts of the village a little over 2 hours later, handing the defector off to a waiting escort team at a secure checkpoint well before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. And it was only once that handoff was complete, once the immediate, mission-critical demands on his attention finally eased, that the full weight of what had happened caught up to him all at once. He found himself standing a short distance apart from the others, staring at his own hands, and it was Wolf, notably, who approached him first, moving with none of the clinical detachment that had characterized nearly every interaction between them over the past month. Remove your mask, Wolf said quietly. Just for a moment. Just for me. Naruto hesitated, then complied, lifting the blank wooden mask away to reveal a face that looked, in that early morning light, considerably younger and considerably more shaken than the composed operative who had executed a flawless extraction under fire only hours earlier. "Talk to me," Wolf said, and something in his voice, still measured, but noticeably gentler than Naruto had ever heard it, made clear this wasn't a tactical debrief. "I killed someone," Naruto said quietly, the words feeling strange and heavy in his mouth. Like saying them out loud made the reality of it settle into his chest with a finality it hadn't fully had before. "I was trying not to. I was trying to just stop him. And I still..." He stopped, jaw tight, staring down at his hands again. "You made a decision under extreme pressure, with less than a second to act, in defense of a man who would otherwise be dead," Wolf said, voice steady. "The outcome was not the one you intended. That is true, and I will not pretend otherwise to make this easier for you. But I want you to understand something clearly, Naruto, because this is a lesson that will define whether you last in this line of work, or whether it eventually breaks you." The mentor paused, choosing the next words with visible care. "Intent matters. You did not walk into that room seeking to end a life. You walked in seeking to save one. The fact that the outcome carried a weight you didn't choose does not make you a murderer. It makes you someone who has now paid the first, hardest price this work sometimes demands, and survived it." "It doesn't feel like surviving," Naruto said quietly. "It feels like something broke." "Something did," Wolf said, with a bluntness that somehow felt more comforting than a gentler lie would have. "Innocence, maybe? The part of you that believed a mission could always end clean, if you were skilled enough, careful enough. That part is gone now, and it will not come back, no matter how much you might wish it would." A pause. "But broken is not the same as destroyed, Naruto. I have watched operatives carry this exact weight and go on to become some of the finest people this village has ever produced, because they let it teach them something, rather than letting it hollow them out. Which one you become is a choice you'll keep making, again and again, for the rest of your career in this mask." Naruto was quiet for a long moment, absorbing that, the words settling somewhere underneath the cold, heavy feeling still sitting in his chest, not erasing it, but giving it, somehow, a shape he could begin to carry rather than simply be crushed beneath. "How do you carry it?" he asked finally. "You've obviously done this before." "More than once." Something in Wolf's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, quieter, carrying the particular weight of someone reaching back through years of accumulated cost to answer honestly. "You remember the faces you can afford to remember, and you let the rest settle into something you don't examine too closely too often. You lean on the people who understand the weight without needing you to explain it. And you remind yourself, on the nights it gets heavy, exactly why you chose this path in the first place." A pause. "You told the Hokage you wanted to actually protect people, not the watered-down version genin missions allow. Tonight you did exactly that. The defector you carried out of that safe house is alive because of a choice you made under pressure that most trained adults would have frozen under. That matters, Naruto. Even on the nights it doesn't feel like it does." Naruto nodded slowly, and something in his shoulders eased, just slightly. Not the crushing weight fully lifted, not yet, maybe not ever entirely, but something that felt, for the first time since that room, survivable. "Put your mask back on," Wolf said, more gently than the instruction usually carried. "You did good work tonight. Better than good. I intend to make sure the Hokage hears exactly how well you performed under a situation that deviated significantly from the planned parameters." The debrief with Hiruzen took place later that same morning, in the same private office where the entire arrangement had begun a month earlier, and this time, Wolf was present alongside Naruto, standing at attention beside the desk while Hiruzen read through the mission's after-action report with the careful, unhurried attention he gave every document that crossed his desk regarding his most closely guarded operative. "An ambush during what should have been a low-risk extraction," Hiruzen said finally, setting the report down. "A fourth attacker inside the safe house, undetected by the initial perimeter sweep, and a trainee who identified the ambush's flanking approach before it happened, based on nothing more than terrain instinct, allowing this squad to respond in time to prevent what could otherwise have been a significantly worse outcome." His eyes lifted to Naruto, something complicated moving behind them. "That instinct likely saved Falcon's life, and possibly Hawk's as well. It also cost him something," Wolf said quietly, before Naruto could respond. He took a life tonight, Hokage-sama. His first. I would ask that his next several missions be selected with that in mind. Hiruzen's expression softened, the weight of that statement settling visibly across his features. Of course. His gaze returned to Naruto, steady and searching. How are you truly? Not the version of the answer you think I want to hear. Naruto considered the question carefully, remembering Wolf's words from the walk back to the village. That broken wasn't the same as destroyed. That the weight was something to carry rather than something to pretend away. It's heavy, he said finally, honestly. I don't think it's going to stop being heavy, but I understand now, in a way I don't think I did a month ago, exactly what this work actually costs. And I still think it's worth doing. He paused. I just wish it didn't have to cost what it costs. Hiruzen was quiet for a long moment, and something in his old, tired eyes carried a depth of understanding that only came from decades of carrying exactly this same weight himself. That wish, he said finally, is precisely what keeps a person like you from becoming the kind of operative this village should actually fear. Hold on to it, Naruto. The day it stops mattering to you is the day I'll need to worry. Let's take a breath here for a second, because this chapter's been a heavy one, and I want to acknowledge that directly before we move forward. This isn't a story about a kid who gets a cool mask and effortlessly becomes a hero. This is a story about exactly how much that path actually costs, chapter by chapter, choice by choice. And tonight's chapter, more than any before it, made that cost real. But there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to address before we close things out. Because Naruto wasn't the only one who noticed something significant that night. 3 days later, Team 7 gathered on their usual bridge for another unremarkable D-rank assignment, and Naruto arrived looking, to any casual observer, entirely like himself. Loud complaints about the weather, an exaggerated yawn, the same easy grin he'd worn 1,000 times before. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd never have guessed anything had changed. Kakashi knew what to look for. He'd spent the better part of 15 years as a shinobi reading the subtle tells that separated genuine ease from performed ease, and something about the particular quality of stillness sitting underneath Naruto's usual noise this morning set off a quiet alarm he couldn't quite ignore. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't obvious. It was simply the specific, heavy stillness of someone carrying something significantly beyond their years, doing their best to make sure nobody noticed the weight. He said nothing about it directly. Not yet, not with Sakura and Sasuke close enough to overhear. But he filed the observation away carefully, the same way he'd filed away the bruised knuckles a month earlier, the same way he'd filed away the late nights and the strange, sudden growth in tactical awareness that had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, in the aftermath of an ordinary escort mission gone briefly, violently wrong. It was later that same afternoon, during a lull in an otherwise mundane assignment retrieving lost cargo from a merchant's overturned cart, that the moment arrived which would push Kakashi's quiet suspicion into something considerably more concrete. A village elder, passing by with a small entourage on unrelated business, mentioned, casually, offhandedly, entirely unaware of the significance of what she was saying, a piece of gossip that had apparently circulated briefly among certain circles close to the Hokage's administrative staff. A border operation gone sideways. A defector successfully extracted despite significant complications. A masked operative team that had, according to the whispered account, performed with unusual precision under pressure. They're saying one of the operatives was practically a child, the elder remarked to her companion, apparently not registering, or not caring, that a Jonin sensei and his genin team stood within easy earshot. Youngest field operative anyone's seen active in years, from what I heard. Strange business, if you asked me. Kakashi's entire body went very, very still. Beside him, entirely unaware of the significance of the words that had just been spoken, Naruto continued sorting through scattered cargo with his usual complaints about the unfairness of D-rank missions, giving absolutely no outward indication that anything unusual had just been said at all. But Kakashi's visible eye had already found him, studying the boy with an intensity that had nothing to do with cargo retrieval and everything to do with a puzzle that had just, very suddenly, acquired a piece that fit with uncomfortable, undeniable precision. A child. The youngest operative anyone's seen active in years. The same week Naruto came back from Kuragawa a different person entirely. He said nothing, not yet. Some pieces of a puzzle needed to be turned over carefully, privately, before they were spoken aloud, especially pieces this significant. But as Team 7 finished their assignment, and made their way back toward the village that evening, Kakashi found himself walking a half-step behind his youngest student, watching him with new eyes, turning over a suspicion that had just crossed the line from vague unease into something he could no longer comfortably dismiss. How long, Naruto, he thought, watching the boy laugh at something Sakura said, watching the ease of it, the practice of it. Have you been carrying something the rest of us never even thought to look for? He didn't have an answer yet. But he intended to find one, carefully, patiently, on his own terms, in his own time. And somewhere in the back of Kakashi's mind, a decision was already quietly forming. Whatever Naruto was hiding, whatever weight he was carrying alone in the dark, his sensei did not intend to let him carry it entirely by himself for very much longer. 8 months is a long time when you're living 2 entire lives at once. By the time we rejoin Naruto, the boy who once struggled to land a single clean hit against Wolf in a month-old training ground has become something considerably harder to categorize. His genin missions with Team 7 continued exactly as they always had on the surface. D ranks giving slow, grudging way to the occasional C rank, Kakashi's watchful, quietly patient presence, Sakura's steady friendship, Sasuke's persistent, simmering rivalry that had, somewhere along the way, curdled into something closer to genuine respect either of them fully admitted out loud. But underneath that surface, in the hours between missions and sleep that almost nobody else in the village knew existed, Naruto had been rebuilt almost entirely. He'd completed 11 field operations since that first, blood-soaked extraction near the border. Reconnaissance missions deep into contested territory. A hostage recovery that had gone nearly as sideways as his first mission, except this time he hadn't frozen, hadn't needed Wolf to save the situation. He'd adapted, in real time, and gotten everyone out clean. A prisoner escort that had tested his patience and his restraint in equal measure. A sabotage operation against a weapons cache that had required 3 days of silent surveillance before a single move was made, testing a kind of discipline that had nothing to do with fighting at all. Somewhere in the last 8 months, without either of them fully acknowledging the shift out loud, Wolf had stopped correcting Naruto's technique in training and started, instead, simply refining it, the difference between teaching someone to walk and coaching someone who already knew how to run. You've gotten faster, Wolf observed one evening, watching Naruto complete a silent infiltration drill through a mock compound in a time that would have been unthinkable even 4 months earlier. You keep saying that like it's a surprise, Naruto said, pulling off his mask to wipe sweat from his forehead, grinning despite the exhaustion evident in the slight tremor of his hands. Almost sounds like a compliment, coming from you. Don't let it go to your head, Wolf said, though there was something in the flatness of the tone now that Naruto had, over 8 months, learned to recognize as dry amusement rather than genuine reproach. Fast is not the same as finished. You still have significant gaps in your development. Name one. Leadership, Wolf said, without hesitation, and something in the immediacy of the answer made Naruto pause. You have operated exclusively under direct supervision for the entirety of your training. You have never once been responsible for another operative's safety in the field, only your own. That is a different skill entirely, and it is one you have had no opportunity to develop. Naruto considered that for a moment, turning his mask over in his hands. Guess that makes sense, he admitted. Not like there's exactly a lot of opportunities for a trainee to practice bossing around senior operatives. No, Wolf agreed. There generally isn't. Something in the way he said it, a particular, considering quality to the pause that followed, made Naruto glance up sharply, catching the faintest hint of something behind the mask's blank eye holes that felt, unmistakably, like the mentor was turning over a thought he hadn't yet decided whether to voice. What? Naruto asked. Nothing yet, Wolf said. Go home. Rest. Tomorrow's briefing is at the usual hour. Naruto didn't push further, though the exchange stuck with him longer than it probably should have, a small, nagging thread of curiosity he couldn't quite let go of. He had no way of knowing, walking home through the quiet, sleeping village that night, that the thread he noticed was about to become the central fact of his entire life. The call came 4 days later, and it did not come from Wolf. Naruto was midway through a mind-numbingly dull D-rank assignment, retrieving a runaway ferret from beneath a merchant's storage shed, a task that felt almost insultingly small given everything he'd accomplished in the shadows over the past 8 months. when a masked figure dropped silently into the alley beside him, chakra signature suppressed but unmistakably Anbu, delivering a single, terse instruction before vanishing again just as quickly. Hokage-sama requests your presence. Immediately. Alone. He handed the retrieved ferret off to Sakura with a mumbled excuse about needing the bathroom, ignored Sasuke's narrow, suspicious look, a look that had become distressingly familiar over the past 8 months, though Sasuke had, so far, never voiced whatever suspicions he was quietly accumulating, and made his way toward the Hokage's tower at a pace that fell somewhere between urgent and trying very hard not to look urgent. He was ushered into Hiruzen's office to find not just the Hokage waiting for him, but Wolf as well, standing at rigid attention beside the desk, and something in the gravity of the room's atmosphere told Naruto immediately that whatever this meeting was about, it was significant. Close the door, Hiruzen said, and Naruto did, the familiar click of the latch settling into place carrying the same weight it had carried 8 months earlier, the first time he'd stood in this room and had his entire life quietly rearranged. What's going on? Naruto asked, once the door was secured. Hiruzen exchanged a brief, unreadable glance with Wolf before answering, and when he spoke, his voice carried a gravity that made Naruto's stomach tighten with anticipation. There was an operation 2 nights ago, along the northeastern border. A routine sweep of suspected smuggling activity, nothing that should have escalated beyond a standard containment action. He paused. It escalated. Significantly? The squad captain overseeing the operation was killed in the engagement. Naruto's breath caught. I'm sorry, he said quietly, and meant it, even without knowing the details, even without knowing the person. The weight of that loss registered immediately, viscerally, in a way it wouldn't have 8 months earlier. Thank you, Hiruzen said. Captain Heron was one of my most experienced operatives. His loss is significant, both personally and operationally. He folded his hands together on the desk, and something in his expression shifted into something more deliberate, more carefully weighed. His squad, 3 operatives, all seasoned, all considerably senior to you in both age and experience, currently has no captain, and they are in the middle of an active, time-sensitive operation that cannot simply be paused while I search for a suitable long-term replacement through ordinary channels. Naruto's stomach dropped, a sudden, dizzying premonition of exactly where this conversation was heading crashing over him half a second before Hiruzen confirmed it outright. I want you to take the position, Hiruzen said. Effective immediately, as field captain of that squad, for the remainder of this operation, with the possibility, depending on how you perform, of the assignment becoming permanent. For a long moment, Naruto simply stared at him, certain he misheard. Me, he said finally. Captain? Of a squad with 3 operatives who've been doing this longer than I've been alive. Considerably longer, in at least one case, Hiruzen confirmed, with a faint, weary trace of dark humor that did nothing to soften the enormity of what he was actually proposing. Hokage-sama, Naruto said slowly, with respect, is this actually a good idea? I've been doing this for 8 months. I've never led anyone. Wolf just told me 4 days ago that leadership was my biggest gap. It is your biggest gap, Wolf confirmed, speaking for the first time since Naruto had entered the room. That has not changed in the last 4 days. Then why? Because gaps close through experience, not through waiting, Hiruzen said. And because, Naruto, I am not choosing you for this assignment out of sentiment, or out of some desire to reward your progress with a title you haven't yet earned in the traditional sense. I am choosing you because the tactical reports I have received over the past 8 months, from Wolf, from Hawk, from Falcon, from every operative who has worked alongside you, consistently describe an operative whose judgment under pressure, whose battlefield awareness, whose capacity to read a situation and adapt in real time, already exceeds what I would expect from operatives with considerably more field experience. He paused, letting that settle. Command is not, first and foremost, about seniority, Naruto. It is about the ability to make correct decisions quickly, under pressure, with incomplete information, and to inspire the confidence of the people relying on those decisions. You have demonstrated the first quality repeatedly. The second, earning the confidence of 3 seasoned operatives who have every reason to doubt a captain younger than their own field experience, will be the true test of this assignment. Naruto absorbed that in silence, the weight of it settling slowly over him. 8 months ago, he'd been a genin nobody in the village bothered to look at twice. A month ago, he'd taken his first life and wondered, in the cold aftermath, whether he truly understood what he was signing up for. And now, apparently, he was being asked to lead. What if they don't listen to me? He asked quietly, voicing the fear that sat closest to the surface. What if I give an order and they just don't follow it? Because I'm some kid in a captain's mask they've never even heard of? Then you will have to earn their trust the same way every captain before you has had to earn it, Hiruzen said, not unkindly. Through demonstrated competence, not through the authority of a title alone. I will not pretend that will be easy, Naruto. It won't be. You are asking 3 grown operatives, each with years of field experience, to follow the tactical judgment of someone who could, quite literally, be their child. Some of them will resist that. Possibly all of them, at least initially. That's incredibly reassuring, Naruto said, a thread of dry humor slipping through despite the tightness in his chest. Thanks for that. I would rather send you into this with clear eyes than false comfort, Hiruzen said. You have earned enough honesty from me by now, I think, to deserve exactly that. Wolf, who had remained largely silent throughout the exchange, spoke up then, his voice carrying a weight that made both Naruto and Hiruzen turn toward him. There is something else you should understand, Naruto, before you accept this, and I want to be clear that this is a decision you are permitted to decline, without consequence, if you do not feel prepared. I'm listening. A captain's responsibilities extend beyond tactical decision-making in the field, Wolf continued. You will be responsible for the well-being of every operative under your command. Their safety, their morale, their trust in your judgment, even in moments when that judgment asks something difficult of them. If you make a mistake as a trainee, the cost falls primarily on you. If you make a mistake as a captain, the cost falls on people who chose to follow your orders, believing those orders would keep them alive. He paused, letting the weight of that land fully. That is an entirely different category of burden than anything you have carried so far, and I would be failing you as your mentor if I let you walk into this without understanding that distinction clearly. Naruto was quiet for a long moment, turning that over, feeling the particular gravity of it settle into his chest alongside everything else this year had already taught him to carry. He thought about the safe house 8 months ago, the weight of that first kill, the way Wolf had told him that broken wasn't the same as destroyed, that the cost was real but so was the good the work made possible. He thought about the 11 missions since, the way he'd grown into the mask a little more fully with each one, the way something in him had settled, over these months, into a version of himself that finally felt like it fit. And he thought about 3 operatives he'd never met, currently in the field, currently without a captain, currently vulnerable in a way that a delay in leadership could genuinely cost them. If I say no, he said slowly, what happens to that squad? I find another solution, Hiruzen said honestly. Possibly a temporary reassignment of command from another squad, which would leave that squad similarly short-handed. Possibly a delay in the operation itself, which carries its own risks given the time-sensitive nature of what they're pursuing. There are options. None of them are without cost. Naruto nodded slowly, and something in his posture straightened, the same quiet, determined resolve that had carried him through that blood contract 8 months ago settling once more across his shoulders. Then I'll do it, he said. Not because I think I'm ready, because I don't think anyone's ever fully ready for something like this, but because there's a squad out there right now without a captain, and if I can help I should. Hiruzen studied him for a long moment, something warm and proud and worried all moving together behind his old, tired eyes. That, he said finally, is precisely the answer I was hoping to hear, and precisely the reason I believe you are the right choice for this, despite every reasonable argument against it. The ceremony, if it could even be called that, given the necessary secrecy surrounding the entire arrangement, was brief and unceremonious. A field promotion, conducted quietly in the same private office where Naruto's entire double life had begun. Hiruzen affixing an official seal to a document that would exist in exactly one secure location and nowhere else, formally elevating Naruto's status within the ANBU chain of command from trainee to acting field captain. Your new designation, Hiruzen said, sliding a small, wrapped bundle across the desk, will be Kitsune Fox. A faint, knowing smile touched the corner of his mouth. I understand the significance won't be lost on you. Naruto unwrapped the bundle to find a new mask waiting inside. No longer the blank, unmarked wood of a trainee, but a fully carved fox mask, sharp-featured, painted in clean white with thin red markings along the cheeks that echoed, deliberately or not, the whisker marks Naruto had carried on his own face since birth. He held it for a long moment, something tight and overwhelming rising in his chest that he didn't fully have words for. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "Wear it well," Hiruzen said. "Your squad is currently holding position roughly 2 days' travel from here, awaiting further instruction. Wolf will brief you fully on the operation's parameters before you depart, and will accompany you for the handoff, though he will not remain with the squad beyond ensuring the transition goes smoothly. From that point forward, Naruto, the command is entirely yours." The 2-day journey to reach the waiting squad gave Naruto more time than he strictly wanted to sit with the full weight of what he'd just agreed to, and Wolf, walking beside him at a steady, ground-eating pace, used the time to brief him thoroughly on both the operation's tactical details and the 3 operatives he was about to inherit command over. "Ibis," Wolf said, as they moved through dense forest terrain well north of the village, "is your most senior operative, 15 years of field experience, specializes in reconnaissance and long-range tracking. Quiet, methodical, doesn't waste words. She served under Captain Heron for nearly a decade and will, I suspect, take his loss harder than the others, at least privately. And she's going to look at me and see someone barely older than her own kids, probably," Naruto said. "Likely," Wolf agreed, without softening the observation. "Manage that honestly rather than trying to overcompensate for it. Ibis respects competence far more than she respects bravado." "Noted." "Who else?" Badger, Wolf continued. "Close combat specialist, blunt to the point of bluntness itself becoming a kind of tactic. He will test you early, directly, likely within the first hour of your arrival. How you handle that test will set the tone for everything that follows." "Test me how?" "I don't know precisely," Wolf admitted. "Badger's methods are his own. But I would be surprised if he simply accepted your authority without some form of direct challenge first. He is not disrespectful, precisely, simply someone who has earned his position through demonstrated strength, and expects the same standard from anyone giving him orders." Naruto absorbed that, filing it away carefully. "And the third?" Crane, Wolf said. "Youngest of the 3, though still considerably more experienced than you in terms of years served. Skilled in medical support alongside standard combat capability. My assessment is that Crane will likely be your easiest path to earning trust within the squad, pragmatic, results-focused, less concerned with hierarchy than with whether the person giving orders can actually keep the team alive. So one who'll judge me quietly, one who'll challenge me directly, and one who'll wait and see," Naruto summarized. "A fair assessment," Wolf said, something that might have been approval coloring the flat tone. "You've been listening well these past 8 months. They reached the squad's forward position late on the second evening, a concealed camp tucked into a rocky outcropping overlooking a valley that, according to Wolf's briefing, held the smuggling operation they'd been sent to track and ultimately dismantle. 3 masked figures rose to meet them as they approached, a heron-masked woman whose posture carried the particular stillness of someone deep in controlled grief, a broad-shouldered man in a badger mask whose stance radiated an unmistakable, appraising skepticism, and a slighter figure in a crane mask who simply watched, arms crossed, waiting to see how this would unfold before forming any opinion at all. "Wolf," Ibis said, inclining her head slightly. "And this is your new captain," Wolf said, without preamble. "Designation Kitsune. He carries the Hokage's full authorization for this assignment." He held out a sealed document bearing Hiruzen's personal mark, and Ibis took it, examining it in silence for a long moment before passing it wordlessly to Badger, who read it with visibly less patience. "You're joking," Badger said flatly, masked head tilting toward Naruto with an expression Naruto couldn't see but could easily imagine. "This is a kid. This is your captain," Wolf corrected, voice carrying an edge of finality that closed off further argument, at least for the moment. "I will remain through tomorrow to ensure a clean transition. Beyond that, the command is his." Badger's masked gaze remained fixed on Naruto for a long, uncomfortable moment, and Naruto forced himself to hold that gaze steady, refusing to look away, refusing to fidget, refusing to give any outward sign of the nervousness sitting tight in his chest. "Wolf said he'd test me. Might as well be now. You have a problem with the assignment, Naruto said finally, evenly, before Badger could speak again. Say it directly instead of talking around it. I'd rather deal with this now than have it sitting between us during an active operation. Something in Badger's posture shifted, surprised, perhaps, at the directness of the response. Fine, he said. You want it direct? I've been doing this for 12 years. I watched Captain Heron die 2 nights ago because a call went wrong under pressure. A call made by someone with a decade of experience behind him, and it still went wrong. And now the Hokage's telling me I'm supposed to trust my life to someone who, if I had to guess, hasn't even finished growing into his own body yet. He crossed his arms. So yeah? I have a problem with it. For a moment, silence hung heavy over the camp, Ibis and Crane both watching the exchange with careful, unreadable attention. That's fair, Naruto said finally, and something in the simple honesty of the response seemed to catch Badger slightly off guard. You don't know me. You have no reason to trust me yet, and I'm not going to stand here and try to talk you into trusting me with words, because words don't mean much before someone's actually seen what you can do. He paused. So here's what I'll offer instead. Give me this operation. Watch how I lead it. If by the end you still think the Hokage made a mistake, take that concern to him directly. I won't stand in your way, and I won't hold it against you for saying it. But until then, I need you following my calls in the field, not second-guessing them mid-operation, because that's how people actually end up getting hurt. Can you do that? Badger was quiet for a long moment, studying him, something in his posture slowly, grudgingly, shifting from open hostility towards something more measured. One operation, he said finally, that's what you get. After that we'll see. That's all I'm asking for, Naruto said. Beside him, though he couldn't see it beneath the mask, Wolf allowed himself the smallest, most private flicker of satisfaction. Ibis approached him separately. Later that evening, once the rest of the camp had settled into the quiet routine of watch rotations and equipment checks. Captain Heron trained me, she said quietly, without preamble, settling onto a rock a short distance from where Naruto sat reviewing the operation's tactical maps by low lamplight. Nearly 10 years ago. He was patient with me in a way most captains weren't, back then, and I owe a great deal of who I am as an operative to what he taught me. I'm sorry for your loss, Naruto said quietly. I mean that. I know it probably doesn't help much, coming from someone who never met him. It helps more than you'd think, Ibis said, and something in her voice carried a tired, genuine warmth that Naruto hadn't expected. Most people offering condolences don't actually mean them. You do. I can hear it. She was quiet for a moment, studying him in the dim light. I won't pretend I'm not skeptical of this arrangement, Kitsune. I am, but I've served under captains who earned their position through seniority alone and led poorly regardless. And I've heard enough about your record over these past 8 months from operatives who've worked alongside you to know that skepticism about your age isn't the same as doubt about your capability. She rose, brushing dust from her uniform. Show me you can lead this squad safely through tomorrow's operation, and I'll follow you as readily as I followed him. That's not a small thing for me to say. I hope you understand that. I do, Naruto said quietly. And thank you? She nodded once and disappeared back toward the watch perimeter, leaving Naruto alone with the maps and the low lamplight and the enormous, settling weight of exactly what tomorrow was going to ask of him. Crane, notably, said nothing at all that evening, simply watched, from a careful distance, the way Naruto interacted with the rest of the squad, the way he reviewed the operation's details with a thoroughness that clearly surprised the more experienced operative, the way he never once raised his voice or postured for authority he hadn't yet earned. It was, Naruto would learn later, exactly the kind of quiet, patient observation Wolf had predicted, Crane forming judgment not through words, but through evidence, gathered carefully over time. The operation itself unfolded the following night, and if you're expecting a clean, uncomplicated first command for our young captain, well, I think by now you know this story doesn't really work that way. The smuggling operation they'd been tracking turned out to be considerably better defended than initial reconnaissance had suggested, a discovery that became apparent almost immediately once Naruto's squad moved into position along the valley's edge. Chakra signatures suddenly flaring in numbers well beyond the 4 or 5 guards their intelligence had predicted. That's not 4 guards, Badger muttered, low and tense, from his position beside Naruto. That's closer to a dozen. Captain, this doesn't match the briefing. Naruto's mind raced, calculating, the same terrain-reading instinct that had carried him through every mission since Kuragawa kicking into overdrive as he studied the valley below, the layout of the smuggling camp, the placement of the guards, the narrow mountain pass that served as the only viable extraction route if things went wrong. This is exactly the moment Wolf warned me about. This is the moment where a bad call costs someone their life, and it's my call to make. Pull back, Naruto said finally, voice low but carrying an authority he didn't entirely feel yet but forced into his tone regardless. We're not equipped for a direct engagement against those numbers, and the briefing's accuracy is clearly compromised. I'm not risking this squad on intelligence we can't trust. We came here to shut this operation down, Badger pressed, an edge of frustration in his voice. Pulling back means they know we found them. They'll relocate before we get another shot at this. Better a relocated smuggling operation than a dead squad, Naruto said steady, refusing to be pushed off the decision despite the pressure. We regroup, we gather better intelligence, and we come back with a plan that actually accounts for what's really down there. That's the call. For a tense moment, nobody moved, the entire squad's attention hanging on whether Badger would push further, whether the fragile Operation Trust Naruto had negotiated the night before would hold under its first real pressure. Understood, Captain, Badger said finally, and something in the deliberate use of the title, the first time he'd used it without a trace of mockery, landed heavier than Naruto expected. They withdrew from the ridge in careful, practiced silence, and it was only once they'd put sufficient distance between themselves and the valley that Ibis spoke, quiet approval evident in her voice. That was the correct call, she said. Heron would have made the same one, in your position. Doesn't feel great, walking away, Naruto admitted. No, Ibis agreed. It rarely does. But a captain who can walk away from a bad engagement is considerably more valuable than one who can't, even when it costs something in the moment. She paused. You did well tonight, Kitsune. They spent the following 2 days gathering more thorough intelligence, Naruto directing a careful, patient reconnaissance effort that drew heavily on everything Wolf had drilled into him over the past 8 months. Patience, precision, the discipline to gather a complete picture before committing to action. By the time they moved on the smuggling operation a second time, they did so with an accurate accounting of the enemy's true numbers, a carefully planned approach that accounted for multiple contingencies, and a squad that had, somewhere over those 2 days, begun to genuinely trust the judgment of the captain leading them. The operation succeeded cleanly. No casualties. No close calls requiring the kind of desperate improvisation that had defined Naruto's earlier missions. Just careful planning, precise execution, and a squad functioning, for the first time under his command, as a single coordinated unit rather than 3 skeptical operatives grudgingly following orders from someone they didn't yet trust. As they made their way back toward the village afterward, Badger fell into step beside Naruto, quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. I was wrong, he said simply. About the assignment. Wanted you to know that directly, since I gave you the problem directly the first night. Appreciate you saying it, Naruto said, genuinely surprised, and something in the exchange settled a weight in his chest he hadn't fully realized he'd still been carrying. Don't get used to compliments, Badger added, a note of dry humor entering his voice for the first time since they'd met. This was one operation. Plenty of time left for you to mess up spectacularly. Naruto laughed, genuine, unguarded, the kind of laugh that belonged more to the loud, easy boy from Team 7 than the careful, controlled captain who led this operation, and something in that laugh, oddly, seemed to put the last of Badger's remaining skepticism fully to rest. The report that eventually reached Hiruzen Sarutobi's desk a few days later was, by any measure, remarkable, a field promotion under difficult, unplanned circumstances. A captain barely into his teens successfully earning the trust and cooperation of 3 seasoned operatives. A completed operation with 0 casualties despite intelligence that had initially proven dangerously inaccurate. Hiruzen read it twice, the way he'd read that very first ANBU report 8 months earlier, and set it down with a slow, thoughtful exhale. Confirm the promotion permanently, he said quietly to the room, though no one else was present to hear it. Kitsune stays. Outside his window, somewhere in the sprawling village below, a boy who had spent 12 years being underestimated by nearly everyone around him was, at that very moment, sitting on a low rooftop with 3 operatives who had, only days earlier, doubted him entirely, laughing quietly together in the dark, the fragile beginnings of a trust built not on age or title, but on demonstrated competence under fire. It wouldn't stay simple for long. Nothing in this story ever does. But for tonight, at least, Naruto Uzumaki, Kitsune, Konoha's newest and most improbable field captain, allowed himself the small, quiet satisfaction of having earned, entirely on his own, something the village had never once thought to offer him freely: respect.